architectural elements, stands as a shining example of the ingenuity of the Indus Valley civilization.
I want to talk about Antarctica. They are clearly protecting or preserving something that may or may not be under 3 miles of ice.
There's undoubtedly a time when Antarctica was lush and green. The question is, was it?
I would like to welcome you to a very special episode of After School. I'm a designer and builder by profession, but have for many years been an avid investigator into the marvels and mysteries of this amazing world we inhabit. I would like to invite you to join us here on a journey into the realm of sacred number and symbol, and the forms, patterns, and cycles of both space and time in which these numbers are embedded. Today, thanks to the talented team at After School, we'll take a peek behind the veil into the ancient symbolism of sacred number that still exists as part of our everyday lives. The animation format employed here is a powerful medium for conveying the essence of this knowledge. And so, without further ado, let us begin. So what is the universal language? It's symbolism. It's number and symbolism and form. And number, symbolism, and form are universal regardless of the spoken tongue, which one happens to have been brought up. And hopefully in the next hour, hour and a half, I'm going to be showing you examples of this so that you can see for yourself what actually the universal language of geometry and symbolism actually means. So we're going to jump right into it here and talk about sacred numbers embedded in everyday phenomena. So what is the universal language? These are the things that we all pretty much think about and use on a daily basis without ever really pondering the fact that there's actually deep symbolism hidden within them. We measure our life in terms of days, 24 hours, referred to as a tropical or solar day. And it turns out that 24 of these hours are 1,440 minutes. This is one of the key numbers within the ancient canon of numerical cosmology that the ancients used to basically design and create their world. The 1,440 minutes equates to 86,400 seconds. So if you just listen to these numbers, look at them, and let them kind of soak into your brain, once you've gotten into this as actually a system, a methodology of transmitting information, these numbers are actually carriers of information because each number stands for meanings beyond just the apparent ones. So we see 1,440 minutes is equal to 86,400 seconds, and a 12-hour span of time, which is usually represented on the clock, 720 minutes, which equals 43,200 seconds. So just look at those numbers. You'll think that obviously 43,200 is half of 86,400. The 1,440, we're going to counter that number again here momentarily. So these are just examples of some of the time measures, how we think about time in our particular culture. Space measure, we talk about a foot, we talk about 12 inches, we talk about a square foot. And you'll notice that the square foot has the same repetition of digits, 144, as the 24 hours does. All we do is we tack a zero on that. We have the number of minutes in a day. We have a cubic foot equaling 1728. I'm going to call your attention to the 1 square yard, which is 1,296 inches. As it turns out, we can stick a 0 on the end of that, and we have 12,960 years, which turns out to be an awesomely important span of time in terms of some of the great cycles that affect this planet, and that's what we're going to be getting to. Geometry, everybody knows that a circumference of a circle is divided into 360 degrees, and that 360 degrees of arc, because each degree is subdivided into minutes of arc, there is then 60 times 360, as it says there, 21,600. And then you'll notice the 21,600 minutes of arc equals 1,296,000 seconds of arc. That's a mighty fine subdivision of a circle that would be used mostly by astronomers to measure the motion of distant stars. But notice that number, 1,296,000, and you'll see that it's the same number, just raised by 3 orders of magnitude as the number of square inches in a square yard. Okay, now another thing you might notice about most of these numbers from 1440 to 8640, 43,200, 144, 1728, 36, 1296 is that they all probabilistically add up and reduce to a single digit 9. Notice that all of them. Pick any one of them, other than, say, with the exception of 24, but 1440 adds and reduces to a single digit 9. 1296, you'll notice the same thing. 1 and 2 and 9 and 6 is 18, which adds to a 9. Okay, so if you're taking notes, write these down or make mental notes of these numbers, because these are the numbers we're going to be encountering now as we progress through this journey here into the hidden mathematics. So we will start by looking at how some of these same numbers and other numbers are associated with the measures of geometry. And here we have what I refer to as the alphabet of sacred geometry. And these are the simplest forms. These are the polygons. You have a circle, which is actually not a polygon, but we have an equilateral triangle, a square, and a pentagon. And each of these can be measured by the number of degrees that determine the angles of the sides. So, for example, we look at a circle, which is just a special case of an ellipse with eccentricity of 0. We've covered this already, so let's go right to the equilateral triangle, and we'll see it's 60, 60, and 60, which equals 180 degrees. Again, notice that we've got the number 9 recurring. We go to the square, which is 4 times 90 degrees. The total number of degrees defining the square is 360, the same as the circle, the same as the measure of a circle. And we measure the polygons by essentially measuring the angles of the vertices or the corners. So then likewise with the pentagon, each of the angles between successive edges is 108 degrees. So you multiply the 108 times 5 and you get 540. Again, notice, everything adds up to 9 for some strange reason. 108 is going to turn out to be a very important number. It's a lunar number, as you're going to see. 108, anybody know what metal has an atomic weight of silver? Atomic weight of 108? Yes, that's right, it's silver. Very good. All right, so let's get into some of the solid. Tetrahedron is this form right here, and it's composed of 4 of the equilateral triangles. So we have, as it says here, there's 4 triangular faces. 4 times 180 is 720 degrees. That is the total angular measure of this particular geometric form. This is known as one of the Platonic solids, or regular polyhedra. Polyhedra means multiple faces. And the regular polyhedra is a family of 5, there's only 5, that have the same shape or the same polygonal face. In this case, the equilateral triangle. And then we will move on to the cube. And the cube is 6 faces, and they're each square. And we saw that each of those square faces had 360 degrees, 6 times 360. The important thing is to grasp that the total number of degrees in this form is 2,160. 2,160. We're going to find out that that number actually turns out to be pretty significant in the measure of other parts of time and space. Then we'll go to the octahedron, and it has 8 triangular faces. This is our octahedron right here. And they're all, you'll notice that so far the tetrahedron and the octahedron are both composed of equilateral triangular faces. And essentially, if you look at the difference between the tetrahedron and the octahedron, you could just imagine it if we could take the tetrahedron and split it along an edge and insert a 4th triangular face, it would cause it to flatten out somewhat, and it would give us the top half of the octahedron. And likewise, we could insert a 5th equilateral triangle in here. That's going to give us the icosahedron, which I'll show you in a minute. If we tried to insert a 6th one, though, we discovered that the whole thing flattened out into 2 dimensions. So that wouldn't work as far as enclosing space. So in any case, notice we're seeing a recurrence of this number that we saw, 1440. Remember we saw that number back right here, the number of minutes in a day. So let that relationship sink in. The number of minutes in the time that it takes our Earth to spin exactly once on its axis relative to the sun happens to be the same number of degrees that define the octahedron. And that's actually what we're talking about there when we're talking about a tropical or solar day. We're talking about exactly one rotation of the Earth on its axis relative to the sun. Okay. Then we have the icosahedron, which is 20 faces, all equilateral triangles. As you can see, if you look at the vertex of this thing, you see that there are 5 faces clustered around each vertex. So if we were to split an edge, insert another triangle, what it would happen is it would flatten out into a hexagon, a flat hexagon, with 6 equilateral triangles about its center. In any case, there are 20 of these triangular faces. 20 times 180 is 3,600. So again, we have one of our 9s, and then our final is our dodecahedron. My favorite shape. This is what Plato referred to the dodecahedron as being the shape of the universe itself. The dodecahedron, you'll notice, has 12 faces, 20 vertices, whereas the icosahedron has 20 faces and 12 vertices. So they're duals of each other. We could actually suspend this icosahedron. If the dodecahedron was hollow, we could put it inside. We would discover that each corner of the icosahedron coincided with the center of the pentagonal face of the dodecahedron. Okay, each pentagonal face, as we found out, each edge was 108. 5 times 108 is 540. 12 times 540, as it says, is 6,480. So again, we've got the number 9 redundantly occurring over and over again in these measures. Okay, 6,480 turns out to be a critically important number as well, as you're going to see as we proceed along. Oh, and then we have the star tetrahedron, which would be 2 tetrahedrons interlaced, and I don't have one of those today. But if you can picture a tetrahedron like this, and then one like this interlaced, it gives you what's known as sometimes the star tetrahedron, or the stellated octahedron. It is composed of 2 tetrahedrons, each of 720. So here again now you're seeing the repetition of the same number, 1440, being the measure of the star tetrahedron. Okay, so now we're going to talk about time. First thing we're going to look at is astrological time. I don't know how many studied astrology. But in this particular scheme of time, the total duration of the precessional cycle, 25,920 years. This is the motion of the Earth on its axis like this. Or you could think of it like this. The axis of the Earth actually forms sort of an hourglass motion, a long, slow period of rotation. It's you could consider the Earth's 3rd motion, next to its 1st motion, which is the daily rotation of the Earth on its axis. its second motion, which is the orbit of the Earth around the Sun, and its third motion, which is the precession of the Earth's axis. The diurnal or daily rotation of the Earth on its axis gives us the day-night cycle, which is obviously of critical importance to our life down here on Earth. The orbit around the Sun also is likewise of critical importance because that's the yearly cycle. The third motion is what the ancients referred to as the Great Year. And it's been measured by astronomers at slightly over 50 seconds of arc of motion per year, which actually puts the astronomically determined number slightly less than this one. But we don't know that that's necessarily constant for the whole cycle. In any case, the ancient number that was typically attributed to this great year cycle was 25,920 years. That great year was considered to be analogous to our annual year. And just as the annual year was divided into 4 seasons of spring, summer, winter, and fall, likewise the great year was divided into 4 great seasons, symbolized by the 4 fixed signs of the zodiac: the bull, the lion, the eagle, and the man or the angel. If you divide 25,920 by 4 to determine the duration of each season, you'll discover that it's 6,480 years, which is interesting because 6,480 years, as you recall, was the total measure of the dodecahedron. So here we have this.
We're changing videos. We're watching a video we've watched a million times, but it's honestly the best video. And it's what I want to watch.
Season of the great year, which was considered to be profoundly important to ancient cultures all over the world, who had various ways of representing this fourfold division of cyclical time. All right, then we have, from the ancient Chaldeans, we have what was known as the Saros cycle, which was 3,600.
Three, two. This is live, ladies and gentlemen. And this is a very unusual podcast we're going to have here, and a very unusual discussion. I have to my left Michael Shermer, very famous skeptic. He's been on the podcast before. Of course, Randall Carlson, amazing gentleman who knows far too much about terrifying things like asteroids. And Graham Hancock, author, also fantastic human being, many times been on this podcast as well. And this all came out of a podcast that Randall and Graham and I did recently, and Michael Shermer commented on it, and it was all essentially on the hypothesis that the great extinction that happened with the North American land animals that happened somewhere around the end of the Ice Age, and the end of the Ice Age, the abrupt end of the Ice Age, being caused, please correct me if I fuck any of this up, being caused by a comet impact. Michael Shermer had some questions about that, and we said this would be an amazing podcast to get everybody together in a room and go over this. Since then, there's been some interesting stuff that's happened. Well, I thought this was really fascinating that Forbes has a mainstream article in Forbes, did a comet wipe out Ice Age megafauna? And this is actually from just a couple of weeks ago. And then there was also this interpretation that's fairly recent as well about one of the stone tablets, one of the stone carvings rather, on Göbekli Tepe. And Graham, you would probably be the best to describe that.
Yeah, that was published in Mediterranean Archaeology and Archaeometry, peer-reviewed journal, by a couple of scientists from the University of Edinburgh. And they are proposing an interpretation of the Göbekli Tepe imagery. There's quite a lot of imagery on those T-shaped pillars, particularly one pillar, pillar 43 in enclosure D. And their deduction, what they take from their interpretation, of course many will disagree with them, their interpretation is that those images are speaking of the comet impact. They're speaking of a comet that hit the Earth roughly 12,900 years before our time.
And Randall, this has been something that you've been obsessed with for many, many years now. We've documented it and detailed it in many conversations we've had on the podcast.
Yes. Now, I can't say that I'm that familiar with that article. I haven't had a chance to get into it. So
But this
I see.
idea that the comet impact is what has caused the end of the ice age.
Well, it's so complex, but now what we do is we throw some type of an impact into the mix, and it seems to fill gaps
Pull this right up to you.
it seems to fill gaps that were at this point still unexplained. You know, there's varying theories between some extent of climate change and some extent of human predation that caused the extinction. And I've always felt like you can't blame it on one or the other. I think humans probably had a role, but only in the very final stages of the extinction event. And one of the scenarios would certainly suggest that there were extreme climate changes between what's called the Balling-Alarod, which was the rather gradual warming at the very end of the Pleistocene, which was then followed by the Younger Dryas, which was the return to full glacial cold, and then the end of the Younger Dryas, which is dated at about 11,600, which is considered now to be the boundary of the Holocene. Post Younger Dryas, pre-boreal it's called, would be the beginning of the Holocene. And it seems that most of the extinctions did occur between roughly 13,000 and 11,600 years ago, although the dating has a wide spread on it, so you can't pinpoint it down to a specific event. But I've always felt like that there had to be something we needed to look at that triggered the extreme climate changes that we do see at the end of the Ice Age. And to my opinion, you can't attribute that solely to Milankovitch theories, which is basically the changing solar terrestrial geometries, because they're too slow. And what we see at the end of the Ice Age were very rapid climate changes. And so one of the things that I think has been missing has been the trigger. Wallace Brecker pointed out years ago that possibly a major flood from the draining of Lake Agassiz caused an interruption of the thermohaline circulation, which is basically the circulation of the North Atlantic Ocean, and that this might have been what triggered the Younger Dryas and then also contributed to the mass extinction events. But now I think that the dating of the draining of Lake Agassiz is too late for that, and was probably a latter event within the overall melting phenomena that occurred between roughly 14,600 and about 11,000 years ago. Somewhere in there we have to fit that mass extinction event, and I definitely have thought that climate change was the dominant factor in that. But then what triggered the climate change? That always seemed to me to be something that was not ever really explained. The comet impact theory is very controversial, but the evidence has been steadily mounting now for a decade.
Including physical evidence, right? Like the core samples that show nuclear glass scattered out throughout Asia and Europe at roughly the same time period when they do the core samples?
Yes, most of it's dating to 12,800 to 13,000 years ago.
These are called impact proxies.
Yeah.
Impact proxies.
Nanodiamonds, melt glass, microspherules. These kind of things are associated with impact, not necessarily always caused by impact. So this has been part of the reason for the controversy, but it's the abundance of all of these at a particular level which leads a large group of scientists to feel that we have had a comet impact.
Yeah. It's the full assemblage of things that is difficult to explain by processes without invoking some type of a cosmic event.
And it also corresponds with what you believe is a period where Earth travels through a series of comets.
Well, this gets us to the ideas of what would be called the British neo-catastrophists, Victor Klube and William Napier and a number of others that have theorized that from time to time Earth encounters the debris from a large disintegrating comet. And there's an interesting, William Napier addresses this in an interesting article I can pull up here pretty soon, that possibly around 13,000 years ago, Earth may have encountered some of the debris from a disintegrating comet, which ultimately goes back to Fred Whipple, who is one of the godfathers of cometary science.
Could I just come in on that for a second?
Yeah.
I mean, specifically, Bill Napier and Victor Klube are identifying the remnants of this comet with the Tauride meteor stream, which is familiar, I think, to everybody. We pass through it twice a year. We see meteorites, particularly at the end of October, early November. That debris stream is still there. It still contains according to their argument, bits of the comet. There are large objects in it, like Comet Enki, Rumiki, Giotto, and so on, 4 or 5 kilometers in diameter. And the suggestion is that the meteor stream has got lots of small bits of dust, but it's got some larger stuff too, and some of that stuff fell out of the meteor stream 12,800 years ago and impacted primarily the North American coast.
Now, Michael, when you listened to that podcast, you had some questions. You are a professional skeptic, so of course you were skeptical. What are your thoughts about all this?
Yeah, let me pull back and give a bigger picture. After the podcast, I went and got the book, Magicians of the Gods, and actually I listened to it on audio. So it's, I don't know, like 16, 18 hours of Graham reading with his wonderful British accent, which is, for Americans, that elevates the quality of the argument by an order of magnitude.
Yeah, that's how they sell things in infomercials over here.
And Graham, you're a good writer. It's a very compelling story.
Thank you. You're a great skeptic.
And so I think, a number of points about, in general, the idea of alternative archaeology, which is really what we're talking about here. I prefer that to pseudo-archaeology because that's it's supposed to be a little bit of an insult. So alternative archaeology, so it's good to remember that, so you have these guys on the podcast for 3 or 4 hours, and the audience listening thinks, yeah, why don't these guys get a fair hearing? I mean, it's like there's the mainstream and then there's these guys.
Right.
But there isn't just these guys. There's hundreds of alternative archaeological theories. So which one gets the play, which one gets attention, which one doesn't? And for a mainstream archaeologist who's busy in the field and trying to get grants and so on, they mostly just don't have the time to sort through all these alternative theories. Because this is just one, and as we'll see in the next couple hours, there's hundreds and hundreds of things to be addressed. So that's kind of what we do. So just to rattle off a few, the lost tribes of Israel who colonized the Americas, Mormon archaeology, explanation of Native Americans, the Kensington runestones in Minnesota that the Vikings had come here, the Black Egyptian hypothesis. When I was in graduate school, there's a book called Black Athena was published, that the Egyptians were actually black, and that the sort of Western white male dominance of history had written them out of the past. So this was a whole alternative archaeology. Piltdown Man, Thor Heyerdahl, and his hypothesis that the Polynesian islands were colonized by South Americans who went east to west. That's since been debunked, but that's yet another one of these things. South American archaeology, Olmec statues seem to have like African features on them, so maybe Africans went directly across to South America. So there's Eric Van Doniken, Zechariah Sitchin. Now most of these Graham rejects in his book, to your credit, so you're a good skeptic too. But for an outsider, to an anthropologist from Mars who steps into this thing cold, doesn't know anything, it's like, well, they're all alternative, which is the right one, and how do we know? And so the way it works in science is the default position is the skeptical position. We assume your hypothesis is not true, not just you, anybody's hypothesis, like the Clue-Napier hypothesis. That was widely published. It was widely covered in mainstream scientific journals and popular science magazines like Scientific American. And it has not fared that well over the last decade or so. It's still around. It's still debated, but so you put it in the mainstream through peer-reviewed journals, and then you go to conferences and you have it out, and that's kind of where we end up with, well, this is what we think is probably true for now, and then all these other people out here, if they don't jump into the pool where everybody is, then there's no way for an outsider to know whether these alternative things have any validity or not, other than they make a compelling case in a popular book, yes, but what do the mainstream scientists think? So, and the problem is that so a couple of specific things, like what I call patternicity, the tendency to find meaningful patterns in random noise, the Virgin Mary on a grilled cheese sandwich or whatever. Those are fun examples, but taking pictoglyphs and then comparing them to constellations, like here we have some constellations on your roof here. It's easy in the mind's eye to find a pattern. The question is, did those people really think 10,000 years ago, 5,000 years? So this is a field called archaeoastronomy. Ed Krupp, the director of the Griffith Observatory here in LA, this is what he does. And sometimes he thinks the patterns mean something, sometimes they're totally random. And, or you take something like the pyramids, you know, as Graham knows, there's 100 theories about the pyramids. And there's the mainstream one, and then there's all these other ones. And this is why people like the director there, he just can't deal with them all, you know. So just as one example I used in my book, Why People Believe Weird Things, that, one guy calculated that if you divide the height of the pyramid into twice the side of the base, you get the number close to pi. And then he just sort of works all these different numbers, so therefore it's cosmically significant.
Well, Richard Hoagland was like the best example of that,
Yes,
right?
Hoagland.
He would find these patterns in Mars and claim that if you go from this rock to half the distance, and
Right.
why would you do that? That
Right.
doesn't make any sense. He would create these patterns.
Right, and that's okay. I mean,
To make his case.
all scientists look for patterns. So, to take climate change, either the Earth is getting warmer, or it's not. Either it's human caused or it's not. There's a pattern in the data. You can see the pattern. The question is the pattern real? So this is why we use the term climate consensus. It's not a democracy. It's not like we voted on it and decided this is the truth. It's that independently, all these different scientists working in different fields, publishing in different journals, come to the same conclusion. So we call this consilient science or convergence of evidence science. That it's not like these guys are meeting on the weekends going, boy, we got to combat those crazy right-wingers with our data. They're independently coming to these conclusions. So that lifts our confidence that, yeah, there's probably something to their theory. Such that there's now so much data converted into this, you'd have to deconstruct every one of those independent evidence. So then you have things like what I call the problem of the residue of anomalies. In any field, there are a residue of anomalies we can't explain. So like UFOs, for example. Ufologists, and me, a skeptic, agree that 90 to 95% of all the UFO sightings are explained by natural phenomena. Venus, swamp gas, airplanes, geese, whatever. They know that. And so we're really only talking about 5%. Like, how do you explain that one right there in 1967 on June 3rd? I don't know. No one knows that one. And then from there they build, well, that's my case. And
Right.
if you can't explain that, then I have a case. No.
Well, that's very different than what we're talking about here. though, right?
How is that relevant to us here?
It's totally relevant because I think almost all of your argument is based on this residue of anomalies, what we call the God of the gaps argument. If you scientists can't explain, this particular rock right here or that particular petroglyph, then I'm going to count that toward my compilation of data to support my hypothesis of a lost civilization.
But no one is saying that the scientists can't explain it. What essentially, particularly Randall, with his series of images has shown, is that what you have here is something that can be explained by rapid melting of the ice caps. And Randall, step in, if you will. Okay, go ahead if you want.
Well, they do say, I mean, it depends what you mean by rapid. A glacial dam that, as our geologists will tell us in a moment, that breaks, that's fairly rapid.
Mm-hmm.
Back in '96, there was a very popular book called Noah's Flood. This was a serious book by two geologists that said it was the rapid filling up of the Black Sea that swamped over the civilizations living on the edges of this, and that's where the Noachian flood story comes from. Okay, so it was widely debated and so on, censored as it well. But that's fairly rapid. I mean, we're talking over the course of weeks or months or years. To a geologist, thousands of years is rapid.
Mm-hmm.
So, an impact by a comet happens in a couple hours or a couple of days or weeks versus a couple of months or years. What do we mean by rapid?
Okay, well, what are you saying then?
Okay.
So what are you saying about their theories in particular?
Okay, so the problem, I think, Graham, the deepest problem is much of your theory depends on negative evidence. That is, I don't accept the mainstream explanation for the pyramids, the Sphinx, the Machu Picchu, whatever.
Well, let's not talk about that. Let's just talk about this specific subject, because it's going to take a long time just to cover
okay, all right. So I'll just
asteroidal
hit
impacts.
all right. So my final point is the falsifiability one. That is, what would it take to refute your hypothesis? Like, for me, the answer would be, like, if Göbekli Tepe turned out to be what you think it might have been, the place where advanced ancient civilization once inhabited, or they used it. Where are the metal tools? Where are the writing, the examples of writing?
Perhaps a decision was made not to use metal. Perhaps a decision was made that errors had taken place, that in reinventing civilization we shouldn't perhaps go down quite the same route as before. Perhaps writing isn't always an advance. Perhaps an oral tradition which records in memory, which enhances and uses the power of memory, may be a very effective way of dealing with information. We regard writing as an advance, and I can see lots of reasons why it is an advance, but if we put ourselves into the heads of ancient peoples, maybe it wasn't. I mean, there's a tradition from ancient Egypt that the god Thoth, god of wisdom, was the inventor of writing, but we have a text in which he is questioned by a pharaoh who is saying, well, actually, have you really done a good thing by introducing writing? Because then the words may roam around the world without wise advice to put them into context, and what will happen to memory when people... So there might be a choice not to go that way.
All right, but then what do you mean by advanced? When you say there used to be a lost advanced civilization before 10,000 years ago.
Well, let's just pause here for a second, because what we know for a fact is that the carbon dating in all the area around Göbekli Tepe is somewhere around 12,000 years. Is that correct?
11,600 years ago is the earliest they found so far, but a great deal of Göbekli Tepe is still underground.
Right, so at least what we know is someone built some pretty impressive structures 11,600 years ago.
7,000 years before Stonehenge.
So when that story broke, this is long before you came along with your book, it was controversial in the sense that we thought hunter-gatherers could not do something like this because to do that you need a large population with a division of labor and so forth. And so what the response to archaeologists was, well, I guess we were wrong about hunter-gatherers. Maybe they could do more stuff than we gave them credit for. So why is that not a reasonable hypothesis versus it was actually advanced, but we mean something completely different by advanced, not writing and metal and technology. We mean, I don't know what you mean. What do you mean?
Well, I mean, we have a body of archaeology which goes on for decades, which is saying that megalithic sites, for example, Gigantea in Malta or Hagarim on Nidra, megalithic sites date to no older than 5,500 to 6,000 years old. Gigantea would push it close to 6,000 years old. And there are no older sites than that, and therefore the megalithic site is associated with a certain stage of Neolithic development. Then along comes Göbekli Tepe, 7,000 years older than Stonehenge. Incredibly sophisticated site, very large scale. I mean, Klaus Schmidt, sadly he's passed away. I spent 3 days working the site with him. He was very generous to me. He showed me a lot. He talked to me a lot. And he said basically 50 times as much as they've already excavated is still under the ground, that there's hundreds and hundreds of giant stone pillars that they've identified with ground penetrating radar. He's not even sure if they're ever going to excavate them. But by all accounts, we are looking, if we take what's still under the ground into account, we're looking at the largest megalithic site that's ever been created on Earth. And it pops up 11,600 years ago with no obvious background to it. It just comes out of nowhere. Now, to me, that's rather well, that we know of. But to me, that's immediately a rather puzzling and interesting situation. And I would be remiss as an author and an inquirer into these matters if I didn't take great interest in that. The sudden appearance, 7,000 years before Stonehenge, of a megalithic site that dwarfs Stonehenge, to me, that's a mystery, and it's really worth inquiring into.
To put it into perspective, that's more than 2,000 years older than what we now consider to be the building of the Great Pyramid of Giza, in comparison to us to then. So between our time now in 2017 and the construction of the Great Pyramid, you're talking about 2,000 years earlier than that. And that is unbelievable when you're talking about 7,000 years before what we thought people were doing.
Okay, but my point was that before we go down the road of constructing a lost civilization that was super advanced but different from our idea of advanced, why not just attribute to these fully modern hunter-gatherers who had the same size brains we have and so on, that they were able to figure out and do this? We just underestimated their ability.
But why did archaeologists tell us for so long hunter-gatherers couldn't do it, and we needed agricultural populations that could generate surpluses that could pay for the specialists
that was the theory. But that was so now what archaeologists are saying was, I guess we were wrong about hunter-gatherers.
Well, they might be wrong about hunter-gatherers, or there might be another civilization that they had not discovered that has been unearthed by
okay,
time.
but that's-
After,
But
sorry,
we're talking
Michael,
about
lost,
so much
lost,
time.
lost civilizations are not such an extraordinary idea. I mean, nobody knew that the Indus Valley civilization existed at all until some railway work was done around Mohenjo-Daro in 1923. Suddenly, a whole civilization pops up out of the woodwork that's just never been taken into account before the 1920s. We still can't read its script. You know, the idea that we come across that another turn of the spade reveals information that causes us to reconsider not just was it hunter-gatherers or agriculturalists, but perhaps something bigger than this is involved.
Or in
That's-
between them.
That's not such an extraordinary idea. I get it that mainstream archaeology doesn't want to go there, but that's my job
No,
to
I
go
don't.
there.
I don't think that's correct. They would be happy to go there if there's evidence for it. By what you just said, they now fully accept the Indus Valley civilization. How did that happen if they were dogmatically closed-minded?
I don't say that they were dogmatically closed-minded about that. The evidence, the massive amount of evidence that came up with the discovery of Mohenjo-Daro, Harappa, Dholavira, and other such sites, it's very difficult. You have to be completely stupid to say that that's not a civilization. Göbekli Tepe is a bit more nuanced. You know, we have stone circles. We have some interesting astronomical alignments. The world's first perfectly north-south aligned building.
Maybe.
No, definitely.
Again, that's a patternistic thing.
Well,
like,
I'm citing Klaus Schmidt. You know.
well, that's all right. But any of us who read back into history 10,000 years ago, what we're thinking, that they might have been thinking, that's always a danger for anybody, not just you. All
That's
of
a good point. Who was Klaus Schmidt?
Klaus Schmidt was the original excavator of Göbekli Tepe. He was the head of the German Archaeological Institute, DIG, at Göbekli Tepe. He kindly spent 3 days showing me around the site. And really nobody's disputing the astronomical alignments of Göbekli Tepe. They weren't particularly interesting to Klaus Schmidt, but they're there.
And what is the alignment? Like, how is it established?
Well, when you have a perfectly north-south aligned structure, perfectly north-south, to true north, not magnetic north, then you are dealing with astronomy by definition. And there are other alignments of the sun.
True north as established today, or with the precession of the equinoxes?
True
when
north
you're
is
talking
always
about
true
12.
north.
Okay.
It's the rotation axis of our planet.
Okay, so it to this day it points exactly in the same place where it was pointing.
It always points to true north.
Okay.
But back to this, they don't want to go. Sure, they want to go there. They would be happy to go there. Case in point, 2 weeks ago in the journal Nature, the most prestigious scientific journal in the world, there was published an article that humans, or maybe Neanderthals, lived in San Diego area 130,000 years ago. This is an order of magnitude older than the Clovis dates.
This
of
was
13,000.
the mastodon bones they found that were
Mastodon
smashed.
bones, yeah.
They
So
believe.
here's an example of how, clearly there's not some conspiracy to keep alternative people or fringe or radical theories out. It was published in peer-reviewed, the most prestigious journal in the world. There it is. 2
And
weeks
then
ago.
what happened?
Well,
Hasn't there been a massive reaction to that and lots of scathing remarks by other academics?
Yes, but that's normal. That's how
Yes.
science works.
Yeah.
You get pushed back. You got to have a thick skin. It's just the way it goes.
You've got to have a thick skin, that's for sure. But maybe sometimes your skin is so thick that you
Wait,
just
why do
can't
you
sense
stop there?
anything
It's so
around.
Well, of
dumb,
course, we don't want
man.
that either.
So what do you think is going on when you look at something like Göbekli Tepe that's covered?
The lag,
covered up
man.
Purposefully, right?
So much
Yes,
lag,
deliberately
dude.
buried. Again, I cite Klaus Schmidt. He's the authority on this. He's the excavator.
So much
he
lag.
absolutely adamantly insists that
just
site was deliberately
like this
buried
this
and finally
level,
covered
man.
with a hill.
It's
which
just
is what
everything
Göbekli
has to
Tepe
go
means in the
perfectly.
Turkish
Like
language,
it's just
pot-bellied
too
hill.
much.
And you're talking about something. Give me the perspective of how large they believe it is currently, as of current.
What's excavated at the moment is on a scale of Stonehenge. What's under the ground may be as much as 50 times larger.
Jeez.
But at Göbekli Tepe, no one lived there. There's no tools. There's no.
Well, you're talking
they
about
don't even have- they-
12,000
But they don't even
years
have.
old, though.
But if it's buried, there should be pottery. There's no pottery, no writing, no articles of clothing. No one lived there.
Well, you're saying nobody lived there, so why should they have pottery? Why should pottery be in the fill?
But-
why
but
would they
how
go?
about-
Why would they go along and break some pots and stick it in the artificial
but how
fill?
about something? They're trash something that would indicate it's different, a different kind of people than what we're used to seeing in the archaeological record.
Well,
in other words,
Well, it's just rubbish that they poured in. It's just stones and earth, buckets of it.
In other words, Grant, for you to gain support for your theory amongst mainstream archaeologists, they want to see positive evidence to overturn the old theory. In other words, the burden of proof is on the person challenging the mainstream.
I completely agree.
In every field.
But isn't there some proof that the mainstream idea of these hunters and gatherers never had anything in what the theory was that would indicate these people were capable of building something even remotely the size of Göbekli Tepe?
Yeah, to me, that's the stunning beauty of this find. It overturns our ideas of primitive hunter-gatherers that could not do this. Apparently they can.
That's one possible assessment.
That's right. So this, I call this, somebody else, the bigotry of low expectations. You know, it's like we had this kind of low expectations for these hunter-gatherers. Maybe we should jettison that idea. And in my own other field of the history of religion, it also threw that off because this apparently was a kind of a spiritual, religious. That's the wrong word they would have used.
Actually, nobody can know that.
That's right. So, but if it was, this is the big National Geographic article emphasized that. Maybe this is the very first religious spiritual temple ever built because they didn't live there, so they went there for a reason.
Isn't it also possible that this is signs that civilization was more advanced 12,000 years ago than we thought?
Okay, more advanced. What do we mean by
We're
advanced?
talking about the ability to construct an amazing structure.
Well, okay.
How big was it? Like, how tall are these stone?
Some of them are 20 feet tall.
Yeah, but
some of them are smaller with astronomical alignments. Klaus Schmidt called it a center of innovation. He was intrigued by the way that agriculture emerges around Göbekli Tepe at the same time that Göbekli Tepe is created. And he went on record with me, perhaps he's not right, but he went on record with me as saying that was the first agriculture. These were the people who invented agriculture. Now, to me, the notion that a group of hunter-gatherers wake up one morning and invent megalithic architecture, the world's largest megalithic site, and at the same moment invent agriculture, stretches credulity a bit. And I think I would prefer to propose, and I have proposed, that what we're looking at is evidence of some kind of transfer of technology, that people came into that area who had other knowledge, and that was applied, and perhaps they mobilized the local population around this site. Perhaps that's precisely why we see agriculture developing there. So perhaps that's the skill that's being passed on.
But I don't see anything particularly. Okay, the stone work is spectacular, but that's not any more advanced than a few millennium afterwards.
But you're talking about something 20 feet tall made of stone
but we know
by people that were hunter-gatherers?
But a couple hundred people can move multi-ton stones.
There's no mystery in moving the stones. They're still
right,
moving
right.
20-ton stones in Indonesia today.
Yeah,
I mean,
but
megalithic culture still exists.
You also know that the carving on the outside is extremely complex. It's three-dimensional carving.
Okay, but I mean,
but you know what that means?
But
do you know what that means?
But Lascaux at 30,000 years ago has magnificent cave paintings with three-dimensional animals.
But that's painting. You know that they. But you know, hold on a second. Do you know what I'm saying when I say three-dimensional carvings?
Yeah, like the Venus.
No, the carvings were on the outside, meaning they didn't carve them into the rock. They carved away the rock around them, which is pretty sophisticated stuff for hunter-gatherers. And they're doing this on these 20-foot tall stone columns. I mean, it's pretty impressive stuff.
Okay, but there the assumption is that they couldn't have figured this out. We know from modern societies where, say, Australian Aborigines, in one generation, they go from stone tools to flying airplanes. The brains are quite capable of doing these amazing things.
Did they go from stone tools to flying airplanes without somebody introducing them to airplanes?
Yeah, you're actually making his argument for him.
No. It's not that much of a reach to carve stone. People have been carving stones for thousands of years.
The entire archaeological opinion on megalithic sites for decades before this was precisely that it was beyond their ability to do.
And now the mainstream has changed its mind
but
about this. Or at the very least,
a little shift.
Let's pause for a moment. Let's pause for a moment. So, for sure, we all agree human beings made this.
Yes, not aliens.
Okay.
Even
so
he
the
rejects
argument,
the aliens.
so the argument is not whether or not aliens made it. The argument is whether or not humans made it that were sophisticated. Well, they're clearly sophisticated enough to make this incredible structure that is some sign of some sort of civilization. I mean,
I believe so.
It is. It's a gigantic structure.
Here I agree with Graham that we again undersold who these people were. My friend Jared Diamond goes to Papua New Guinea. He talks in the opening chapter of Guns, Germs, and Steel how smart these people are that live out there in nature, what it takes to survive. He wouldn't last an hour. You know, from L.A., he wouldn't last an hour with his Papua New Guinean friends out there in the wild.
Well, that's just because he doesn't know how to survive, and they've been passing down the information for generation after generation.
Very smart. Okay, so it's not a problem of intelligence. And is there? Okay, so here's the other thing we don't know is that there might be lots more of these sites, and where there's
I visited one of them, Karahan Tepe. You've got the T-shaped pillars sticking out the side of a hill in a farmer's backyard. I mean, I think we're actually at the beginning of opening up this inquiry, not at the end of it.
Okay, but then before you okay, why not just say, we don't know. This is a spectacular mystery and leave it at that. Why write a book that
Well,
says,
you guys on
I'm going to fill in all the gaps?
You
with
guys
this?
on the mainstream side won't speculate and won't explore. I don't claim to be an archaeologist. I'm not a scientist. I'm an author. It's my job to offer an alternative point of view and to offer a coherently argued alternative point of view. And I must say, Göbekli Tepe strikes me as a gigantic fucking mystery, and a mystery that is worthy of exploration from a point of view that may not satisfy you.
Oh, well, it doesn't, you don't have to satisfy me.
You and your colleagues, and I certainly don't have to satisfy you or them. That's not my project.
But like your opening chapter with Schmidt, I really loved the kind of conversational style you had with Schmidt in the book, where he's dialoguing, where Schmidt goes and look at this, and then he says, but what? Wait, what's that again? Now? It's like a little bit like Columbo. Like, wait, I had just one more question, and the mystery kind of thickens. That's perfectly okay. That's great. I mean, that's what science is all about, is uncovering mysteries that we then have to figure out. So there's always more mysteries, but that doesn't mean that's not positive evidence in favor of a particular theory like the lost civilization. It's just we can't explain this. Full stop.
Yeah. We certainly can't explain it, and you can't explain it by saying that we underestimated hunter and gatherers either.
Well, why not? We know they made it. Whatever you want to call them.
Well, we know humans made it.
That's right. We know humans made it. So whatever you want to call them.
But why do they believe that people were only hunters and gatherers 12,000 years ago? It's because they didn't have any evidence to the contrary.
Right.
This is evidence to the contrary.
I agree.
So you agree that there weren't hunter and gatherers?
Okay. But there's several stages in between. Just 12 people living out in the jungle by themselves versus us. There's like a whole bunch of different.
Well, I would say that Göbekli Tepe is a gigantic stage.
Well, we don't. Okay, they didn't live there, so we have to figure out where were they living and what was there. So that has to be excavated.
Well, they only excavated 10% of it, right?
And meanwhile, what you're saying is that we shouldn't speculate at all, because mainstream archaeology is speculating.
No,
mainstream archaeology is
perfectly
speculating
okay.
when saying it's definitely was hunter-gatherers who did this. That's also a
That
speculation.
seems more of a reach.
Okay, but not. Okay, they may be more than hunter-gatherers. They may have been partially settled. You can have any kind of number of states.
But what you can't apparently have is the possibility of a transfer of technology from people who were really masters of that technology already when they came in.
But where are these people?
Well, you're dealing with an
where are their
incredible-
homes?
12,000 years ago,
That's a
their
long
fingerprints are
time.
there. Let's find their homes. I don't know that their homes matter. Would their homes even survive after 12,000 years?
Well,
I'm not sure.
They're trash.
But what
they're
survives?
Tools, they're something.
Well, what
Screw
would be-
trash and tools. We've got Göbekli Tepe. It confronts us. It challenges the mainstream model. I think it's reasonable to consider the possibility that there was something more than just hunter-gatherers involved here in creating this extraordinary place. And that's all I've done.
It seems to me that to say hunter-gatherers could build this, wouldn't be opposed to the idea that they're hunting and gathering, but it does certainly imply a lot of leisure time.
Yes.
A lot of leisure time.
Well,
And-
we know hunter-gatherers. Sorry.
It's okay. It was like,
Well, again, if we place this back, particularly within that climate zone at 11,006 to 12,000, 13,000 years ago, whatever it turns out to be, we're dealing with an extremely demanding and challenging climate, which wouldn't necessarily, to my mind, be conducive to the emergence of a settled culture that would be capable of undertaking a project on this scale. And as somebody who's built a lot of things and moved quite a few heavy weights in my time, I find it the idea sort of perplexing to me that they would be. What I would have to ask is, what is their motive? What is their motive for undertaking a project on this scale? Because it's an enormous project, and to move a 20-ton block of stone is really a challenging task to undertake today. Well, without the infrastructure of large machines and so forth. But to do it by hand, it would be an enormous undertaking. And I, to me, it's like, when are they having time to hunt and gather when they're engaged in a project of this scale?
So we know hunter-gatherers have way more free time than modern society people do. That's the one thing we've learned, is that it's a pretty good way to make a living, actually. They have a better varied diet than we have. This is the Neanderthal diet, right? They have a better varied diet and a lot more free time.
Yeah, but that's within
And a lot less stress.
We knew that
So-
all along about hunter-gatherers when
Right.
we were saying they couldn't build megalithic sites.
But we're
So they have
looking
the
at
time-
a
they have the time
time
to do it.
where the environment is undergoing rapid changes to which adaptations would be extremely challenging. And we know those changes are going on all over the planet. We know that sea levels are rapidly rising over a period of a few thousand years, from a sea stand low of about 400 feet up to the present level. We also know that biotas were shifting dramatically all over the planet. The effects of the Younger Dryas were global. Pretty much that is, I think, the emerging consensus now, that both hemispheres, north and south, were being affected by the climate changes of the Younger Dryas. So what we're doing is we're placing this phenomena, this project within this context of these extremely challenging times in which, adaptation to the environmental changes could easily be the all-consuming challenge of the times. I'm just finding it difficult to imagine a disconnect, to see this disconnect between a project of this magnitude and the motive for doing it during a time when obviously the environment could be posing serious constraints upon people's ability to function in that.
Well, Randall, we don't even know the motives of the Easter Islanders and
No, we
why
don't.
they raised these huge, but we know they did it.
But isn't that become a central question, though? Something had to have motivated.
But let's get back to Göbekli Tepe. So let's just be real clear here. We know there were humans. We know that it's at least 12,000 years old. And we know that the real dispute here, the real question is, did these people have structures and did they have agriculture? We know that they were human beings. They were essentially modern human beings. So were they hunter-gatherers or did they have structures and
before
agriculture?
Göbekli Tepe, they didn't have structures and they didn't have agriculture.
So we
After
know
Göbekli
that,
Tepe, they did.
So the fact that they were able to build something so monumental, what kind of a leap is it at all to
double
think
duck.
these people could figure out how to plant
What a blessed
food
run.
and figure out how to make a house?
Well, I mean, again, if you look back 30,000 years, 40,000 years to these cave paintings, these are pretty sophisticated.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
They are.
Clearly, they had abstract reasoning. They could think from the concrete to the abstract and so on. It's not a big reach to go from that to moving stones around.
I'd say there's a big difference between painting and engraving on
Yeah.
cave walls
I don't think so.
and
You need to see-
creating
To me, the painting is even
sorry,
more
and creating the
sophisticated.
largest megalithic site that's ever been built on Earth.
Wait a minute.
I think there's a huge difference between those two. I mean, nobody would compare the construction effort on Stonehenge or Gigantea with cave paintings. I agree with you. The cave paintings are magnificent. I've had the privilege to visit many of the painted caves. Stunning work. And as Picasso said when he came out of Lascaux, we have invented nothing.
Right.
I mean, they were
Right.
that was that modern human mind, symbolic mind at
Right.
work there. But this is another matter. This is a large-scale construction project that's going on. And it's not just a construction project. It's not like huts. It's hundreds and hundreds of very, very large megalithic pillars, which have to be mobilized, brought to the place. You know, organizing a workforce in order to do that, even that requires preparation and time and learning and practice. It's not something that you wake up one morning and just can do overnight.
You think that the paintings are more impressive than Göbekli Tepe?
Yeah, or at least comparable.
I think that's absolutely
because
ridiculous.
To convey
Why?
three-dimensionality on a 2D
Like, why?
plane, that's what Picasso meant. It's like, wow, that's incredible. It's
Why?
like developing perspective
this
and to use the
game,
natural
man.
shape
But
of
it's
the
just,
walls
it's
to
not.
create a three-dimensional perspective look. That's pretty abstract.
You're comparing
It is-
apples and pears. It's not a
yeah.
construction project.
Okay,
It's,
so
it's not. I don't think
we
it's
don't
even
have to compare
remotely.
them.
But I don't think it's even remotely
But
as
what I'm
impressive.
saying is that it doesn't take a huge leap of imagination to think these people were pretty smart. They had
Well, we know
abstract
that they were
reasoning.
smart. We know what they were smart
No
just
dispute.
because of the fact that those construction projects were done by who? By whoever. We know that they were smart. Whoever built Göbekli Tepe was clearly intelligent. Whoever made those 3D carvings,
Right.
clearly they were intelligent. But to think that someone drawing on cave paintings is more impressive
Not more
than
impressive,
erecting
just-
20-foot stone columns with three-dimensional carvings on them of a lot of animals that weren't even native to the region.
That's
So- yeah,
Is that
that's
not
debatable?
necessarily the case.
Yeah.
Because they could have been
The
extinct
animal- the
with
animals were
fossil
native to
record.
But my point,
Native to the
Joe,
region.
is that these paintings are like, say, 30, 40,000 years old to Göbekli Tepe. So there's tens of thousands of years to develop more that we're very likely to find more archaeological sites.
And yet,
In between them-
up till now, we haven't found them. We haven't found all of that intermediate material. Which is, see, if I could actually see that intermediate material between the
My stick got sticky. I was grinding there. I was grinding in the hallways because my stick got sticky there.
Lost civilization, the survivors of a lost civilization who've mastered
I
those
don't.
skills
I'm
elsewhere
not
to come in and
terrible.
teach those
I don't
skills
know what was
but it
happening.
still looks to me like a transfer of technology, unless you can show me that evolutionary process whereby I can understand how this group of hunter-gatherers became equipped to create this giant site, where they practiced, where they
sticky,
learned
man.
the skills to move the stones, to organize the workforce, to feed and water the workforce in a
It was
rather
slow
dry place.
anyways.
All of that is actually quite a logistical challenge.
Yep. And obviously somebody met it somehow.
Some humans.
Yes,
Right. So the
right,
real question
right.
is, did they have structures? Did they have agriculture? Did they have some sort of a
Probably-
community where they lived in an
probably
established
something.
location?
I would imagine.
So that would push back the time where we thought that there was a civilization. That would push them back into a realm of at least stepping out of the hunter-gatherer stage.
Now, your
correct?
guy Schmidt, as you show in your book, he did not go as far as you did.
Certainly not.
Right.
no.
But he admitted it's a mystery. Okay, why? That would be the scientific approach. I don't know what it is. Great mystery. Let's just wait and see. Versus, I'm going to postulate a lost civilization. Nothing wrong with that, Graham. It's a free country, and scientists do this all the time, as you mentioned.
There's
So,
a
wow.
rather humorous thing, which I have to say, actually, I might even ask Jamie to pull up the couple of images of Fingerprints of the Gods. That's the book I'm best known for. And when I published Fingerprints of the Gods in 1995, essentially I was saying civilization is much older and much more mysterious than we thought. And I was ridiculed for proposing that. 2013, one of the magazines that ridiculed me, New Scientist magazine in Britain, publishes as a cover story a picture of Göbekli Tepe and the headline, civilization is much older and much more mysterious
all
than,
right, fair enough.
than we thought.
Fair enough. Okay, fair enough. And scientists do this. I mean, I followed paleoanthropology for my whole adult life. And one of the big mysteries is, how did we get a big brain? How did we get to abstract reasoning from say, what chimps can do? No one knows.
The doubling of the human brain size over a period of 2 million years,
and
right?
because no one knows, every couple of years there's a new book out. It's climate change. It was
The throwing arm, cooking
that's
food.
right, cooking meat. You know, meat is another big one. A Harvard meat. Okay, and these books come and go, and some of them have legs, some of them don't, and it's just the way it goes.
And then there's Terence McKenna's
It's pretty
theory.
obvious it was psychedelics.
Yeah, that's Terence McKenna's
Not that
stone
made the
ape
brain
theory.
bigger, but that switched the brain
is this
on.
the old Julian?
Julian Jaynes, no,
No.
the bicameral mind, not at all. This is David Lewis Williams, who's professor of anthropology at the University of Witwatersrand in South Africa. His neuropsychological theory of cave art, all kudos to Terence
T-Hunty?
McKenna and Food of the Gods.
What's the
What a brilliant
T-Hunty?
thinker, what a brilliant alternative thinker. But David
Nicky,
Lewis
you always
Williams
put a
at the
smile
University
on
of
my
Witwatersrand
face.
has been working on this problem since 1973, and his argument is that the remarkable similarities that we see in rock and cave art all around the world are explained that we're dealing with a shamanistic art. Shamanism involves altered states of consciousness. This is typical visions of altered states of consciousness, and it seems to have accompanied a great leap forward in human behavior.
And you covered this in your book.
I covered it in Supernatural.
As did Richard Wrangham,'s theory. He's just a highly regarded scientist at Harvard. So he's the meat-eating guy. That it's
Right.
cooking meat.
Right.
So by cooking the protein, that's what gives you the energy to build a huge brain. All right, so now this guy is starting with 10 pluses on his side. He's Harvard, already respected. And even so, his book was like, maybe.
Well, it's probably a series of different events and a bunch of different
It could be.
factors.
That's right. Could be a number
Right.
of different things.
So let's get away from Göbekli Tepe and ancient civilizations, and let's get back to the geological evidence, which, Randall, you're an expert at. And this is one of the main things that you had a dispute with, and this is one of the reasons why we got everybody together. Now, what is your thoughts on what Randall and Graham proposed, specifically Randall, who is much more on the geological side of things?
Yeah. Well, this is why I brought in my phone friend,
Right.
a geologist. So, but by way of background, after your show, I thought, let's give this a fair hearing. This is what we do. So this will be our cover story, and I think the end of summer issue comes out only quarterly.
I hope that Mark Defant is going to be doing some more work on the draft of his article for you that is up online. because that article is full of bullshit statements about me which are demonstrably false.
Well, he's on.
Yeah, he's
so
there, and
you
I'm
can-
happy
you
to.
can
I'm happy
ask
to
him.
engage
What
with those
statements, Graham?
particular issues. Well, I have to put on my reading glass.
And that whatever article's online, this has not been published yet.
Well,
so
it
this is-
claims that it's a draft of the article that will appear in a 2017 edition of Skeptic magazine.
So pull it up, Graham, and
Sure.
Why
give
don't we
you a
bring
chance to
Mark
have
on
your time
and,
report.
yeah.
Let's let Graham go over it first,
So-
and then we'll have Mark on
So
to
here's
refute
the
what he said.
plant on magicians of the gods. By the way, Michael, I mean, you say that you're here to respectfully aim to get at the truth.
Yeah.
There it is, conjuring
let
up
me-
a lost civilization from
Yeah,
nothing.
let me just get to the top of this. I've got it here. Just bear with me a second. So, amongst the words in Mark Defant's article, he is accusing me of duping the public. He's saying that I'm public enemy number one. He's accusing me of arm waving. I admit I do wave my arms. Pontificating. Well, my grandfather was a minister of the church. Little interest in peer-reviewed research. Claimed that no academic would debate. That's utter bullshit. I had a debate with Zahi Hawass. He's a leading Egyptian Egyptologist. Back in 2015, it was not my fault that Zahi Hawass walked out on that debate. I can play the video if you like, a minute and a half of Zahi Hawass lambasting me and then walking out and refusing to debate further. So it's bullshit to say I don't debate or I'm not willing to debate. And finally, he says that I'm conning a hellacious number of people into buying his books. Now, how can we get any dialogue going when somebody begins like that? And
Okay.
then would you like some further? Bear with me, because I just have to scroll down and I don't have a mouse. I don't have a mouse. So Hancock and Carlson claimed several times that no academic would debate them. Not true. I'm accused of doing an about face since Fingerprints of the Gods. Are my views not allowed to evolve with new evidence? Is that somehow a
Well,
crime on my part? Let me just finish.
Yeah.
Then a cheap shot, he cites Jesus Gamara and accuses me of not having the scientific knowledge to deal with issues of gravitation. Now, it's true that Jesus Gamara, who is a descendant of the Incas, who has worked 70 years on the megaliths of Sacsayhuaman, whose father before him, Alfredo Gamara, worked 70 years. It's true that he's got a way-out theory about gravitation. The thing is, I state in my book that it's a way-out theory. What I go on to say, quoted in the attack, is that, however, this isn't the part of his theory I'm interested in. Where I feel he is solidly persuasive is in his observations of the anomalous character of the monuments of the Gyges, etc., etc. Defant doesn't cite that. He just presents me as buying what
I was going for the
Gamara
late
says.
A
I mean,
there.
that's the
My
standard you're gonna
line.
have in Skeptic
See me
magazine.
die
You
wide
have a
there.
serious
I was
problem.
going for the late A
And
because
then
I didn't
Göbekli
upload
Tepe,
it.
he contends that Göbekli Tepe is too advanced to have been completed by hunter-gatherers and must have been constructed by a more advanced civilization. Well, no, that's not what I say. I say it was constructed by hunter-gatherers, but that they were advised and supported by people who had knowledge of this kind of work beforehand.
How is that different?
Well, I think it's very different. I'm not saying it was constructed by. I'm saying that a group of people settled amongst hunter-gatherers and transferred some skills for them. He says that, he quotes me, Hancock makes the following stunning claim. Quote, our ancestors are being initiated into the secrets of metals and how to make swords and knives. I do not make that claim. I'm reporting that this claim is made in the Book of Enoch. That is not my claim. Then what else?
So you don't think that's the explanation?
Well, I'm being misrepresented by your author here.
But I mean, all right, but-
if he wants to represent me, if he accuses me of cherry picking, he shouldn't cherry pick
Okay,
my statements. He should
we're
quote it
still
in full
working on
context.
this. Let's get it right.
Well, it's
So
out
you
there.
You don't
It's
accept
out there on the
online.
internet.
that. Well,
You're still working on it, but it's published online.
Here's a beautiful one.
I didn't know it was online.
Here's a beautiful one. He cites Klaus Schmidt on the character. Schmidt makes a salient point, almost as if he anticipated Hancock's book. Quote, fabulous or mythical creatures such as centaurs or the sphinx, winged bulls or horses, do not yet occur in the iconography, and therefore in the mythology of prehistoric times. They must be recognized as creations of the high cultures which arose later. Well, bullshit, bullshit, bullshit. You've just been talking about the painted caves. Go to Chauvet Cave. You will see a lion man, Hohensteinstadt, a lion man carved out of mammoth.
Please, no, I ran out of bullets.
Bison
Like
man,
what?
straddling lion woman.
Like
her
what?
right arm is
Okay,
transferring,
whatever.
transforming into the head of a lion. So certainly these mythical creatures did exist in the Upper Paleolithic, and it's rubbish to say that they didn't. I mean, how can I go on? The teapot. Oh yeah. Okay. So he's taking issue with me because I suggest that the vulture on pillar 43 in enclosure D is representing the teapot asterism of the constellation of Sagittarius, and he goes and gives us little things of Uncle Sam and some other thing that he shows. Anybody can impose any image on anything. Well, it's not my fault that a couple of academics who didn't even talk to me and had nothing whatsoever to do to me have published a major study in the, I quote it again, the Mediterranean Archaeology and Archaeometry, a peer-reviewed journal, where they make precisely that identification. So at least I'm not alone. At least there are peer-reviewed credentialed scholars who also agree that that figure is representing the teapot asterism within the constellation of Sagittarius. No reference to that.
Okay, well,
Shock's
whatever.
opinions, we're supposed to not go into the minutiae because they've already been dismissed by a study by Liritsis and Vathiadou. Far from it. That study doesn't dismiss shock at all. None of that study was done on the body of the Sphinx itself. It was done in the Valley and the Sphinx temples. And by the way, the dates are extremely troubling. Some of them could push it as far as 3,600 BC that the work was done, or as early in some cases as 1,000 BC. I don't think that study proves anything, and so on and so
just
forth.
to clarify what you do believe then, so that we don't misrepresent you, so you don't think that the lost civilization instructed them on the use of metals?
I don't know. I don't see evidence for that.
But why
Tepe.
would you put that in the book then?
I didn't put it in the book. I was quoting the Book of Enoch. It's a huge passage on the Book of Enoch. It's me, not me who's saying that. It's the Book of Enoch that's saying that.
I understand, but why? I forget
All
what the context.
all I require your defant to do is to state that Hancock is citing the Book of Enoch. He didn't do that.
Okay.
That is, what's the
enough,
word?
that's fine, fair enough,
disingenuous? Is that the polite word you guys use?
But
It seems more than disingenuous. It's a character assassination.
well, but the question is what's the context of including that in your book? I forget.
Well, the context is that actually I was criticizing Zechariah Sitchin. That's primarily what I was doing.
So you don't think that a lost civilization instructed the people who built Göbekli Tepe on the use of metals and tools?
I see no evidence for that. I see Göbekli Tepe. I can't go say they instructed them on the use of metals and tools unless I can find evidence for it.
What did they do?
We don't know.
They generated agriculture. They created a center of excellence around which a
No,
hunter-gatherer...
not they who built Göbekli Tepe. The lost civilization that advised them that you think happened.
Yeah.
What did they do if they...
They've come through a cataclysm. They're survivors, few in number. This is my scenario. You don't have to accept it, I'm sure you don't. They take refuge amongst hunter-gatherers. I mean, I don't know, you're probably have some survival skills. I don't have many. I mean, if we were to have a comet impact in the world today, which were to take out all the underpinnings of modern civilization, I might go settle with hunter-gatherers because they're the people who know best how to live in that situation.
I have no survival skills.
Yeah, so go settle amongst hunter-gatherers, but I might be able to transfer some of my knowledge to them. I might have something that I could transfer to them, and I might have very strong reasons why I might not choose to transfer all of it.
But so, in other words, perhaps this is what happened. Okay, maybe, but how is that different from Zechariah Sitchin's? The aliens advised it.
Well, I
that's
don't
a
need.
lot different.
I think it's massively different, especially since Zechariah Sitchin has his aliens arriving here in 1970s NASA technology. Weirdly, he wrote his book in the 1970s. I mean, I don't go there. I don't make that. I don't make that suggestion. I'm simply saying, perhaps there's been a forgotten episode in human history. Perhaps its fingerprints are present at a number of sites around the world, but perhaps the extremely defensive, arrogant, and patronizing attitude of mainstream academia is stopping us from considering that possibility, and therefore I campaign to get that possibility considered, and I try to do so with as loud a voice as possible.
Well, you're doing it. You're doing it, man.
But doesn't it disturb you that you run Skeptic magazine and someone publishes something like that? That goes against the whole idea of critical thinking. I mean, it's misrepresenting his quotes, it's misrepresenting his perspective, his point of view. It's really disingenuous.
This is one reason we're doing this, so we could get his...
But why would anybody write something like that? And why would you guys publish something like that without checking the facts?
We are. That's not supposed to be posted online.
And why is
this
such
is
a
one of the reasons why
it's online, though. How does something get online if it's not
why is such a
supposed to?
person who will do that a useful contributor to your side of the debate?
Well, one of the reasons we're here is to get your point of view exactly right. All right, so you're saying that there's no evidence that any lost civilization exists. Only the
No, I'm not saying that. I'm
only
saying
the fingerprints of their influence on later peoples we do know existed.
I'm saying there are physical objects. I say Göbekli Tepe is one of them. I say the Sphinx is another.
But see, this is that argument from either ignorance or personal incredulity. I don't accept the mainstream, or I can't think of how this pyramids could have been built, therefore it was built by somebody else through some other technology.
That's not what
Well,
he's saying.
that's not what I'm saying.
They're just post-dating it. They're just,
What I'm saying is the Sphinx
Robert
is,
Schoch
the Sphinx
argument.
is older. I do go with Robert Schoch's argument on the geology. I'm also very interested in the astronomy of the site. And again, I have slides that I could show on this if we have time. You might want to get into Ed Krupp's criticism of the Orion correlation and why he says it's upside down. I can talk to you about that. You know.
We do. I mean, I know Ed Krupp's argument about that. And that was from the 90s, I think.
What's your thoughts on Robert Schoch's conclusions?
I don't, that's not something I know much about.
Well, you
Well,
should.
that's a
if you're
huge
here.
factor. It's a huge factor. Because it's
Your
all
Mark,
about
your
water
Mark
erosion.
Defant knows about Schoch,
Well,
and he rejects him
put
on
him
the
on.
basis of that paper.
Yeah.
And that
all right.
paper really doesn't date the Sphinx. It works with dating of large blocks in the valley and the Sphinx temples. There's not a single sample taken from the Sphinx.
All right, then who dated it?
Who dated it?
I mean,
Liritsis and Vafiadu.
And then why do mainstream archaeologists not accept the older date for the Sphinx? And the answer is because they have a whole bunch of other evidence that points to the date that they think
The
it
answer
does.
to your question is very simple. Mark Lehner and Zahi Hawass put it on record back in 1992. And John Anthony West and Robert Schoch first presented the rainfall erosion evidence on the Sphinx. And what Lehner and Hawass said is, the Sphinx can't possibly be 12,000 plus years old because there was no other culture anywhere in the world that was capable of creating large-scale monumental architecture like this. Show me one other structure that's capable of doing that. Well, they could say that in 1992, Michael, but they can't say it in 2017, not since Göbekli Tepe's
If
been
you don't mind,
excavated.
Graham, could you please, for people, so this could be a standalone thing, people could understand, what is the argument about the Sphinx, the enclosure of the Sphinx? And Dr. Robert Schoch from Boston University, who's a geologist, what was his conclusion?
What Schoch is saying is that the Sphinx and the trench out of which the Sphinx is cut bears the unmistakable evidence of precipitation-induced weathering caused by exposure to a substantial period of heavy rainfall. And that is particularly pointed out in the vertical fissures in the trench. So you see, the Sphinx itself has been subject to so much restoration over so many years that it's difficult for people to even see the core body of the Sphinx today. But it's these, you can see the vertical fissures even down at the back of there. That is what Schoch counts as rainfall, precipitation-induced weathering, heavy rainfall, which is selectively removing the softer layers and leaving the harder layers in place. And the problem is we don't have that rainfall in Giza, in Egypt, 4,500 years ago. You have to go back much earlier to get that rainfall. That's the suggestion.
So that's the suggestion by Robert Schoch, independently of,
Yes.
of your conclusions. or
Totally
anything else's.
independently. Yeah. Schoch disagrees with me on many things, as a matter of fact, and I disagree with him on many things, but I think he's on the money on this.
So that alone would set back at least that one. I mean, it's pretty much established that the Great Pyramid of Giza was constructed about 2,500 BC, right?
There's absolutely no doubt that a huge project went on at Giza around 2,500 BC.
So your argument
involved
is
the pyramids.
not that the whole thing was that much older, was that parts of it seem to have been from an earlier civilization, or
Yes.
at least that civilization far, far earlier than
I
was.
would say that the ground plan, what we have at Giza, the basic layout of the site, was established in what the ancient Egyptians called Zep Tepi, the first time. Astronomically and geologically, I and my colleagues suggest that the first time can be dated to the period of about 12,500 to 13,000 years ago. That was when the site was laid out, because there's intriguing astronomical alignments of the Great Pyramids to the Belt of Orion. I know Ed Krupp has a completely opposite view on this, and of the Great Sphinx to the constellation of Leo, rising due east, housing the sun on the equinox, the astrological age of Leo. Again, I have slides I can.
And that would
show.
align with the geological evidence that Robert
Yes.
Schoch
It
concludes.
aligns with the geological evidence.
Thousands of
The
years of
age of
rainfall.
Leo pretty much exactly spans the Younger Trials.
And so the only argument against that at the time was that there were no other structures like that from 12,000 years
Correct.
ago.
And then Krupp said that the Orion correlation wasn't real because it was upside down. I mean,
But
do you
the
want to get
argument-
into that now?
Well, first, that's not the only argument. It's that, okay, if the Sphinx is built, or the layout for the whole thing is built in say 10, 11,000 years ago. And then the pyramids are built, 2500 BC. What happened in between? Where are all the people, the trash, the places where they lived?
Well, there's
in
a
that
bunch
area?
of different styles of construction.
Something like a...
But not dated in between.
I would propose, Michael, something like a monastery, which has a relatively small archaeological footprint, is on the site. I mean, the idea of information, knowledge, and traditions lasting for thousands of years within a religious system shouldn't be too absurd to us. I mean, Judaism is dealing with ideas that are already best part of 4,000 years old if we go back to Ur of the Chaldees and so on and so forth. So that's all I'm suggesting, really, that the idea is preserve, maintain, that the survivors of the on the site, but in something like a monastery, which has got a very small archaeological footprint. It is not high. Perhaps, again, one can only speculate. And I think there's a lot of speculation on the archaeological side too. One can only speculate, perhaps having gone through a cataclysm, perhaps they felt to blame for this, wrongly or rightly. I mean, there are many, many traditions in which humanity's behavior is implicated in the cataclysm that takes place. And perhaps they didn't want to switch civilization on completely right there. Perhaps they waited, passed down the knowledge through initiates. Enough was there to create a mystery, because it's undoubtedly a mystery that the construction of the Great Pyramids, the first huge pyramids in Egypt, preceded only really by the Zoser Pyramid at Saqqara, that the construction of the Great Pyramids is vastly superior to the construction of the pyramids of the 5th and 6th dynasty that follow it. And that's a little bit counterintuitive, that we have this collapse in skills. One would have expected it to got better. So it sounds like the work on the pyramids started already with a level of knowledge in hand.
Yes, but okay, so here's how I would think about that. There's a lot of perhapsing and maybes because yes, well, so you have a bunch of Egyptologists and archaeologists who have been working on this site for centuries. This is one of the most ancient mysteries and so on. And so let's say there's like 20 lines of evidence that point to built roughly around this time period here. And then you come on and say, okay, but there's this one anomaly of the rain thing, that there was only rain at this time. Now there's a huge gap. You have one anomaly or line of evidence here and like 20 here.
Well, we're talking about different structures, though. There's not a lot of evidence that points to the Sphinx being from a particular time period.
Well, he's saying like 12,000, right?
I'm saying the rainfall evidence suggests
Right,
that.
but other evidence.
And its alignment with the constellation of Leo housing the sun at dawn on the spring equinox. It's an equinoctial marker. Nobody would dispute that. Nobody would dispute that the ancient Egypt... Well, no, I mean, if you make a monument pointing perfectly Jewish... I've stood on the back of the Sphinx at dawn on the spring equinox, and believe me, again, I could show a picture, its head lines up perfectly with the rising sun. But no, I don't think anybody, even Krupp, is disputing that it's an equinoctial marker. Now, here's the thing. You're an ancient Egyptian. You're building an equinoctial marker in 2500 BC. Do you know what constellation is housing the sun in 2500 BC?
I haven't run the little program.
Well, it's the constellation of Taurus. So logically, if you're creating an equinoctial, and the ancient Egyptians were not shy about making images of bulls, plenty of them. If you're making an equinoctial marker in 2500 BC, you really should create it in the form of a bull, not in the form of a lion. That's the puzzling issue. And yet we do have a time when a lion constellation housed the sun at dawn on the spring equinox, and that is the period of the Younger Dryas.
Okay, I'd say that's a pretty big leap.
Well, I know you'd say that, and your colleagues all say that too.
And so now, and then we have a gap of about 5,000 or 6,000 years where there's nothing. There's no.
Let me interject there.
Yeah, please do.
I'm going to refer back to several articles that were published in the 80s and 90s. This one is from Nature, early 80s, late Quaternary history of the Nile. And what it's discussing is the evidence that there was a major shift in the hydraulic regime of the Nile River. It says between 20,000 and 12,000 years before present, when timberline in the headwaters was lower, vegetation cover more open than today, the Nile was a highly seasonal braided river, which brought mixed coarse and fine sediments down to Egypt and Sudan. This cold, dry interval had ended by 12,500 years before present, when overflow from Lake Victoria and higher rainfall in Ethiopia sent extraordinary floods down the main Nile. And those floods have been documented to have been 120 feet above the modern floodplain of the Nile. Any civilization, or whatever you want to call it, living along the Nile River at that time would have had to abandon whatever they were doing there in this regime, this intensified hydraulic regime. And it goes on to say it marked a revolutionary change.
to continuous flow with a superimposed flood peak. So what happened is that there was a major
What
environmental
is this?
change
Why are you running there
that
like
occurred
that?
right there
Like,
around
why?
12,000 to 12,500
What?
years. The dating could be adjusted somewhat since the early 80s, but the point is made is that because of a major hydrological change, major vegetational cover change, major environmental change, this would have caused also imposed changes upon whatever culture was existing there or living there at the time. Now what we have is, in the aftermath of that event, we have basically the emergence of desert, which now would require serious adaptation. It's very likely, too, that these events could have also decimated the population at the time, leaving basically no workforce. And then over a period of 2,000 or 3,000 or 4,000 years, you find that there's enough of a recovery that these kind of monumental structures can be renewed. But it's clear from this and a lot of other studies in the Eastern Mediterranean showing that there are sap-rappel layers, which is basically material that has been washed in from the continental surface that has not oxidized. It has essentially become rotten and carried in, organic material carried in off of the continents by this enhanced regime of water flow, actually forcing so much water that there was a freshwater lid on the Eastern Mediterranean that caused a cessation in the circulation between the upper waters and the lower waters, reducing the amount of oxygen brought down to the lower waters. And so you had these layers of mud that formed on the bottom of the Mediterranean that show this massive influx of fresh water flowing out of the Nile and off of the Egyptian continent at this same time. So clearly the evidence shows that there were major climatic changes that occurred around this time. It is not so speculative to imagine that whoever, whatever, and we don't have to invoke any kind of a super advanced civilization, but whatever cultures were there that were perhaps capable of carving blocks of stone, transporting blocks of stone, as they were at Göbekli Tepe during this time range, would have been, that their activity would have been interrupted to the extent that it might have taken millennia to recover, to get the labor force necessary to undertake major monumental programs on the Giza Plateau. So I think that if we assume this gradualistic scenario, yeah, that's a fair question to ask. What happened in that interval? But if there is a major climatic downturn and a major disruption of the settled patterns of whatever culture was already there, then now we might have an explanation why there would be a flood, especially if these events caused a bottleneck in the population of the area. Of course, this is all speculative, but it is not speculative to say that there is multiple lines of evidence suggesting these major, even cataclysmic changes that engulfed that part of the world during that era. So that could provide an explanation of why there is a gap there.
Makes a ton of sense.
Well, does it? Because
Does it not?
only if you have to have the Sphinx in conjunction with 12,000 years ago in the lost civilization. If you just say that rainwater erosion on the Sphinx is not an explanation for the age, and that the traditional accepted age is that we think it is, then there's no gap to fill. Yeah. So really, all we're talking about is we have, again, lots of evidence here, one anomaly here. I really want the anomaly thing to stick, so I got to explain the gap. The gap is explained by environmental changes.
Yeah, but what is the box of evidence other than a lot of assumptions and a lot of maybes?
It's all, I mean, actually, can you cite me a single contemporary inscription from the date that the Sphinx is supposed to have been made that refers to the Sphinx?
I'm sorry.
Can you cite a single contemporary inscription from ancient, contemporary to the date that Egyptologists ascribe to the Sphinx? In other words, to the reign of Khufu. Can you cite me a single inscription that talks about the Sphinx being built?
This is not. I don't study this area. I don't know.
Okay, well, you can't, because there is no such inscription.
Okay.
Well, one would have thought there would be.
Well, maybe.
It's a giant project. It's 270 feet long. It's 70 feet high. It's carved out of solid rock. Nothing.
Okay, but you have
no
all
reference to
these
it
other-
at all in the Old Kingdom. You actually have to come down to the New Kingdom to get references to the Sphinx in inscriptions.
But you've already said that the pyramids were built at the time we think they were built, not thousands of years
I would say
ago.
that a great deal of work was done on the pyramids at the time of 2500 BC. I think the ground plan was laid out.
And we have like the step pyramid, which is cruder and not as well designed as the other pyramids. That's a transitional stage at that time.
Often argued to be a transitional stage.
Yeah.
You've been to the step pyramid, I'm sure.
No.
Right, and you've been to Giza.
No, I've never been to Giza.
Oh dear. Well, they do make a very different impact. I mean, I've climbed the Great Pyramid 5 times, and I mean, you're dealing with something orders of magnitude different in terms of what's required. I mean, this thing weighs 6 million tons.
I understand, but
it's 481 feet high. It consists of 2.5 million individual blocks of stone. It's a line to true north within 3/60ths of a single degree.
It wasn't very
Compare
fast.
that to Zoser is really not a valid comparison at all. What's more interesting to me is the radical decline that takes place in pyramid building skills in the 5th and 6th dynasty. Go to Unas, go to Pepi, go to Teti at Saqqara. These are a shambles. You can hardly even recognize them as a pyramid. What happened to all that knowledge that's invested in the Great Pyramid? Why does Egypt devolve so rapidly? How do we explain this pristine, amazing work that's done on the Great Pyramid unless there's a legacy of knowledge being attached to it?
Okay, so every archaeologist, Egyptian archaeologist and Egyptologist knows everything you just said.
They do.
And they don't accept any of your arguments. Why not?
That's why I'm needed, because somebody's got to counter this.
Is it just that they're closed-minded and they follow Zahi Hawass and they never think for themselves?
You want to see a closed mind? I'll play you a 1.5-minute video of Zahi Hawass refusing to debate with me.
But all of them, every one of the Egyptologists and archaeologists over the last 2 centuries and so on, they're all dogmatically closed-minded and they can't see the arguments as clear as you? Or is it they're not convinced by your argument?
They're not convinced by my argument. They genuinely and absolutely believe that their argument is right. The notion that I'm proposing is apparently so preposterous to them that it isn't even worthy of consideration, but it is worthy of insults and attacks on me, on my integrity, on my decency as a human being, on my honesty. All of those things get attacked, you know, because mainstream, and that's fine, I'm ready for that. And by the way, I know that archaeologists, academics constantly attack each other all the time. I used to take this stuff personally, but then when I see what they do to each other, the ravaging attack dogs are let loose on any new idea. I sometimes wish scientists would actually look for what's good in a new idea rather than what's bad. But I get why they do look for what's bad.
But in other words, some young graduate student working in that area could make a name for himself by overturning,
My son was a young graduate student at the University of Cardiff studying Egyptology. He got marked down in his degree because he proposed the possibility that the pyramids and the Sphinx might be or might have older origins. He was impressed by my work. It did him a lot of harm in his degree.
And if all this was true, then eventually
you haven't answered my point.
It would come
you
out.
haven't answered my point.
Which is
if
what?
you go against the mainstream view, your career does not progress as an Egyptologist.
I disagree. I mean,
Give me an example.
How is it that we know anything that we know about Egyptology?
Give me an example
now?
from Egyptology of somebody who's gone against the mainstream view and been lauded for so doing.
Well, look, we don't believe everything about it that we believed 2 centuries ago, at, say, Napoleon's time, right? How did all that knowledge come about? How did all the change in that science
It
develop?
really begins with Champollion and the deciphering of the Rosetta Stone.
All right,
So
how was he able to do that against the mainstream?
there was no mainstream
All right, so
that he was
this is my-
against. There
this
was
is
no
my
the
point.
mainstream has taken time to form, and it's very solid now.
I mean,
the
scientists-
Egyptologists all sing from the same hymn book. You'll find very little disagreement amongst
But this
them on
is true
anything.
in every field. But somehow or another, Einstein managed to make an impact because he turned out to be right.
Well, I'm no Einstein, and I don't know if I'm right, but I'm going to continue to oppose that mainstream.
and-
Somebody
I
has
don't
to.
know. That's a valid comparison. Einstein and archaeology.
All right, well, take paleoanthropology. I mean, it's a completely different field now than a century ago. How did that happen if no one ever accepts new ideas? They do. It happens all the time.
Well, they're being
By the
forced
way,
to
but they
accept
do get
Göbekli Tepe, and that's a new idea. That,
But
like,
that-
you know, when you were talking about things taking a long time, and what seems like a long time to us is really a blink of the eye in terms of archaeology. We're in the middle of that. We're essentially in the middle of that with things like Göbekli Tepe, with Forbes publishing an article about the Younger Dryas possibly being impacted by comets and that being one of the causes of a mass extinction.
Right, and when
these are all mainstream ideas now.
And when Alvarez proposed the impact hypothesis for the demise of the dinosaurs in 1980, it was ridiculed, but he turned out to be right, and then that became the accepted.
Right, it takes time.
Well, but what was the key
and
turning
now people are challenging that.
Wasn't the key turning point the finding of the crater? That's what made the difference.
Yeah,
it's
so
kind of hard to argue with
so
that.
again, where's your crater?
Well, this is where perhaps we need to bring in our phone a friend. You know, Malcolm Lecomte, one of the younger Dryas impact scientists. I mean, the point being made is the following. Firstly, that the primary impacts were on ice. There may have been as many as 4 impacts, that they were on the North American ice cap. Some craters have been suggested, for example, very deep holes in the Great Lakes. Other craters have been and will be looked at by the team in the coming months, whether it includes the Coruscant crater, the Quebec terrain, and so on and so forth. There are candidates. The crater has not been found yet, but I would be surprised if a crater was easy to find when, the impact is on 2-mile deep ice. And, one of the biggest strewn fields in the world, which is the Australian Tektite strewn field, there's no crater associated with that. But everybody accepts the impact proxies. There's enough of them to justify that. And that's what's going on around this impact hypothesis.
So on a related question to that is not the lost civilizations and the demise of humans, but the megafaunal extinction of North American mammals. So this has been long debated before the impact hypothesis was proposed. And the competing hypotheses were overhunting, humans just hunted them to the point where, not every last one, to the point where the population numbers get too low and these species can't survive. Or climate change, or both. Climate change weakened the populations, then the humans came over and overhunted them. All right, so, and then the impact hypothesis was proposed. Okay, so this was debated, and it didn't fare that well because there were a lot of mammals and other species that didn't go extinct that you would expect from a massive impact like that. It would have wiped out. Why the selected species, the kinds of species that humans would hunt, are the ones that went extinct, whereas these others didn't.
Well, why would humans be hunting the largest? There's no evidence that humans hunted the predators. There is evidence that they hunted woolly mammoths, but it's a very sparse. I mean, you have no more than a dozen sites that show association between human hunting and mammoths. And a lot of those, like the Lubbock Lake site, is now being questioned. What was previously interpreted as being butchering marks on the mammoth remains there are now being reinterpreted as possibly natural marks on the mammoth bones. But it's a big stretch to go from, okay, we've got a dozen sites where we have mammoth remains, and along with those mammoth remains, we find a few Clovis spear points. In 2 or 3 cases, we actually find, or they have found, spear points embedded within the mammoth, like in the rib cage. But it's a very large stretch to go from there to say that 10 or 12 million woolly mammoths, or 4 species of mammoths on 4 continents, were wiped out by Paleo-Indian hunters, probably in bands of no more than 2 or 3 dozen.
Have you ever been to a head
Like,
smashed in
where's
buffalo
Sky
site?
even, man?
Yes, but that's a good example, because nowhere did that go anywhere close to exterminating the species of American bison.
But each site has its own particular explanation. Could be hunting, could be a massive flood, earthquake, whatever.
Could be a massive flood, yes, exactly. I think there you and I would be in complete agreement.
What does it mean by massive? There's global versus local. So, for example, there's 52 mammalian genera went extinct in South America. Why would they go extinct in South America? About the time that humans were moving down there hunting.
The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis includes South America. There were impacts there.
It does, and again, the dating of the migration of humans into South America is controversial at this point. There is evidence that humans were there long before. Paul Martin's idea of blitzkrieg requires that the animals be so stupid that they couldn't, they had no adaptive capabilities to the appearance of a new predatory species. But what is being demonstrated from examining the lifeways of the Paleo-Indian peoples is that they had very diversified diets, and they were hunter-gatherers. Now, why would they be choosing the largest, most dangerous animals to hunt when they had such a proliferation of other smaller animals? We know that they were foraging. We know that they were eating seafood. There was and fishing, because all of this is being found in the camps. And then it certainly doesn't explain the extermination of the cave bears, the short-faced bears, the camelops, the giant beavers, the giant armadillos, the American Pleistocene lion, the ground sloths that were the size of giraffes, 4 species of proboscideans, meaning mammoths, extinct on 4 continents. And to me, like, wait a second. We cannot invoke a modern example to say, well, here
How
is
about the Maori?
Well, that's controversial also.
I mean, they drove the Maori extinct in
Past eagle.
Well,
Yeah.
that's an assumption
Yeah.
there. That if you
Yeah,
ask the
but
Maori
there's a big difference
themselves,
between that and people with atlatls killing off all the saber-toothed tigers. But here's another answer to one of your questions. You were saying, like, why would some of the animals be alive? Well, we know that the asteroid that killed the dinosaurs 65 million years ago didn't kill everything.
Right.
And that is a massive impact, far bigger than anything we're talking about, and many, many animals survived that. So we don't know why things survive and why they don't. It could be proximity to the impact.
Right.
It could be that their food source wasn't removed. It could be that their predators were wiped out and they managed to survive. I mean, there's a lot of animals that are alive today in this continent. Like, for instance, a pronghorn antelope. Pronghorn antelope. Dan Flores, who's a wildlife historian, wrote an amazing book on it. And when he was talking about the American savanna during, like 15,000 plus years ago, there was all sorts of crazy animals millions of years ago that were like cheetahs that were running down animals at extreme speeds, which is the reason why pronghorn antelopes can run so much faster than any of their current predators. Something much faster than them was killing them, and that was wiped out, but they managed to make it. One of the reasons why they probably managed to make it is because their predators were wiped out. So it's not an even...
And another point, Michael, if it's overkill, it's intriguing that the overkill occurs, precisely in the Younger Dryas window, because I think you'd agree that now the whole story of the peopling of the Americas is pretty much up for grabs. I mean, Clovis first was the dominant model for a very long time, and under that model we're to envisage these Clovis hunters coming in across the Bering Land Bridge, going down the ice-free corridor, and then in like 800 years with their sophisticated fluted points they wipe out all the mammoths in North America. But now we know that humans have been coexisting and butchering mammoths, coexisting with mammoths for thousands of years before that, possibly tens of thousands of years before that.
You mean from evidence in Siberia?
I don't only mean from evidence in Siberia. I mean, I can cite you from Nature magazine just recently. Huge number. I don't think the Yukon is in Siberia, is it?
No.
Okay,
I think the Yukon's in North America. Jacques Cinq-Mars, the excavator of the Bluefish Caves in the Yukon, back in the 1970s was proposing that human beings had been in the Americas at least 24,000 years ago. His reputation was utterly destroyed. His research funding was withdrawn. He was given no access to grants. He wasn't able to do his work. He was heavily penalized and punished by the community. And now, just a few weeks ago, we have the Smithsonian coming out and saying, sorry, we got it wrong. Jacques Cinq-Mars was right all along. And Tom Dillahay, with his work in Monteverde, the shit that he had to take, I think we're in a very interesting time. The peopling of the Americas is really a paradigm that has absolutely been overthrown. The notion of Clovis first. Well, you disagree with Smithsonian then, which is fine. I do too.
No, the Mesa Verde, it's an it's an anomaly. It's an isolated site. Where are all the sites between Clovis and Monteverde?
Do you honestly think Clovis was still first?
For thousands and thousands of years.
Come on, Michael. Do you think Clovis was still first?
Where are all the people between Clovis and Monteverde?
Not my problem.
It is your problem.
No, it's not my problem. They're there in Monteverde and they're there in North America.
Okay,
Go
so
figure.
What's more likely?
Go figure why there's a Denisovan trace in South American Indians and not in North American Indians.
It's like the nature paper I brought up
Maybe people
earlier.
crossed the ocean.
That there were Neanderthals or humans in San Diego 130,000 years ago. Okay, but when you look at that, okay, so they have mammoth bones. It looks like they might have been broken in the link, okay, and the tools, but they're not. Okay, the tools.
We're kind of changing subjects here, though.
Well, no.
You're trying to quibble the evidence of earlier human presence.
That's right.
You're trying to quibble it.
Well, not quibble.
Well, you're quibbling it. You're quibbling it, and you've got every right to say.
What are you saying very specifically that's opposing what he just said?
The reason archaeologists don't accept earlier than Clovis, say earlier than
do.
about 13,000, 14,000
It's
years.
massively accepted.
Like say Mesa Verde, for example.
Okay, I have to bring up an image.
Why don't they accept Mesa Verde?
They do accept Mesa Verde. It is accepted
Michael,
now.
are you sure about this?
As what, 24,000 years?
15 plus, possibly significantly.
Yeah, okay, so
significantly
15,
older.
So 15 is kind of the outside of the window that humans came across the Bering Strait. That's possible. Not 24,000
You open
years.
Clovis first.
Not 130,000 years ago. Now, if it turns out that Nature paper is right and that's confirmed, then that does overturn the mainstream theory for sure.
But why would you? This is not like your field of study. Why would you argue against the Nature
so
paper?
let's
okay, I'll just give you.
let's quote the Smithsonian.
I ask professionals.
Smithsonian, slide number 5. Today, decades later, the Clovis first model has collapsed. Okay, based on dozens of new studies, we now know that pre-Clovis peoples slaughtered mastodons in Washington state, dined on desert parsley in Oregon, made all-purpose stone tools that were Ice Age version of the exact
between 13,000 and that's not.
No, look at this.
All between that, and then 24,000 years down at the bottom, Michael. You know, are you saying the Smithsonian are wrong on this?
Michael, you're jumping to conclusions before you even read that. You want to be right so badly you didn't read the part and other animals there.
Look,
hold on a second. Confirming that humans had butchered horses and other animals there 24,000 years ago. It says it right there, and you are arguing against it without even reading it, which means you want to be right. No, that's absolutely what's going on.
Because I have no dog in this fight.
Well, why didn't you read that whole thing before you started pointing at you being correct?
You published Skeptic magazine and you have no dog in the fight?
You're asking me, why don't mainstream archaeologists accept
you should be skeptical of Clovis first.
Tens of thousands. Okay, call it whatever you want. It goes back 11, 13,
But what do you think
15.
about what that says? That there's evidence they butchered horses 24,000 years ago.
Okay, I would have to check the site on it. I haven't seen this article.
Well, now that you have seen it.
Not my problem.
Okay,
now that you have seen
either.
it,
What is your problem? Because you're the skeptic
no evidence.
and you're here opposing this and you're saying there's no evidence. You haven't even read the fucking article.
Okay, I'm not opposing anything. I'm saying
you certainly are.
This is the reason why scientists accept these dates here, because there's lots and lots of evidence for
that is scientists.
10,000, 11,000, 12,000.
That is
scientists. Then you find one person that says 24,000. Another one, like 2 weeks ago,
this is not
says,
one person. This is very disappointing that you're arguing this without really doing any research about it.
And then
the article is titled, What Happens When an Archaeologist Challenges Mainstream Thinking? That's in the Smithsonian in the month of March.
Okay.
Jack sunk Mars. It was a brutal experience. Something that sank Mars once likened to the Spanish Inquisition. At conferences, audiences paid little heed to his presentation, giving short shrift to the evidence, etc., etc., etc. The result was always the same. When he proposed that Bluefish Caves was 24,000 years old, it was not accepted. What the Smithsonian are saying is now, this is accepted. You need to get up to speed with the data, Mike.
Okay, my archaeology friends like Jared Diamond, who I just checked with on this, who's at UCLA.
Well, he certainly has a dog in the fight.
And he just says, here's the problem. For 50 years, people propose pre-Clovis examples or sites or evidence. They never hold up. The dating turned out to be incorrect. The carbon-14 was not calibrated right. There was this, there was that. They never hold up.
So essentially, you're quoting a friend
away for 50 years.
Well, you're quoting a friend who says the evidence hasn't held up before. Instead of quoting these articles with these scientists who are talking about the data that's showing that human beings butchered horses 24,000 years ago, you're disputing it just because you talked to a friend.
I'm saying that has to be confirmed. That particular
But
site.
Why argue against it?
I'm not arguing against it.
You certainly were.
No, I'm just saying that.
Am I wrong?
I feel you were arguing against it and saying that it's not the case and quibbling it, and you seem to be. If I'm correct, you seem to be a Clovis first advocate. Put your reputation on the line and say you advocate Clovis first.
I'm not going to put a label on it. I'm going to say in the latest evidence that overwhelmingly shows humans coming across the Siberian Straits into North America 11, 12, 13, 14, 15,000 years ago.
That they definitely did then. They definitely did then.
And now
did they before?
What could push it back much earlier would be if they came by boat. Okay, so like where I live in Santa Barbara, there are sites on the Channel Islands that go back 11, 12,000 years ago. And they came by boat. Now the problem is well, if they lived on the shores, which is where the good fishing and eating is, those are underwater. And short of doing good underwater archaeology, which is hard to do and expensive and most of it's probably gone, we may never know.
It's one of my beefs with archaeology actually is that 10 million square miles of the planet that were above water during the Ice Age are underwater now, and marine archaeology is still mainly looking at shipwrecks, you know.
Well, okay. They do that because it's like it's where the light is.
No, it leaves a big unanswered question. At any rate, so for the record, can I at least say that you completely oppose the Smithsonian's position on this, that there has been no paradigm shift?
I will look at this. I haven't seen the Smithsonian thing. All right, I'm not aware of the horse find from 24,000 years ago. I am aware of the 130,000 year date from the Nature paper.
I have a slide on that too.
And if okay, but
Well, I think the major speculation.
Show the stone tools. They're nothing like Clovis points. It's just a big like hand rock that might have been used. It might have been random.
Sorry, a big hand rock is
Yeah,
all
look,
there is before 13,000 years ago?
No, I'm talking about the 130,000-year-old site.
130,000
you're talking about the San Diego thing.
We don't need to talk about that.
Why?
That raises interesting questions. Was it Neanderthals? Was it Denisovans? Was it anatomically modern humans 130,000 years ago?
It
raises interesting questions.
Or is it a misinterpreted site because they aren't
but
stone tools?
I'm not
they're
pinning.
just rocks.
I'm not pinning anything to that. I'm saying yes. That report.
The question is not
was
necessarily
published in Nature.
just about the stone tools. It's about how the bones were shattered, and they believe the bones were shattered deliberately, indicating that someone was trying to get at the marrow.
Maybe.
Indicating,
maybe. Or a tractor rolled over it, a couple of years ago.
No, one had excavated. That's just speculation on your part.
Immediately,
not my part. This was one of the.
Immediately, the find
the
has been quibbled by the archaeological mainstream. Of course, it's been published by the archaeological mainstream too, and the rest of the mainstream is quibbling it. And we will see how that plays out.
But I thought you said that can't happen.
We will say what can't happen.
That the mainstream won't allow, radical ideas.
Nature published it, and the idea is being quibbled.
And here the Smithsonian
Nature certainly
so
would not.
It's okay.
Nature certainly would not have published it if the evidence were not strong. I accept that. Nature's not in the business of publishing, fringy stuff. It is a radical proposal, but it's strong enough to justify publication in Nature. What's interesting to me is that the immediate reaction of the archaeological community is not say, well, what could this mean? Let's look into the implications of this. I mean, if there were Neanderthals or Denisovans in North America 130,000 years ago, we have a whole new scenario building here that really should interest everyone. Instead of the first reaction is, let's destroy this because it's really annoying, let's get rid of it, let's prove it's wrong, let's suggest that it was a fucking bulldozer or something like that. Maybe it was, I don't know, the work hasn't been done yet, but that instant sort of it's almost like an immune response to an idea that doesn't fit into the prevailing paradigm. But the other work, the work in South America, the Bluefish Caves work, that's really not controversial anymore. That's very widely accepted. Clovis First is a discredited and abandoned position. And I have something else to ask you, actually, concerning genetics and DNA. I'm sure you're well up on that. I mean, can you explain why we have a strong signal of Denisovan DNA in certain groups of South American Indians and in Australian Aborigines and Melanesians, but that Denisovan DNA doesn't crop up in North American Indians? How would we explain that if they all came through the Bering Strait?
I have no idea.
Well, it could be boats.
But I mean, this just happens to be something I don't know anything about.
Okay.
So part of the problem of even doing this is that...
It was your idea.
Well, here we are talking. This is good. But part of the risk is that you're going to find something I don't happen to know about. And then it's like, you see, I made my point. What point? Okay, so in like the history of the peopling of America, that area, there's always somebody that comes in with, it's, not Clovis, it's this, it's that, and rarely do they last. Why? The dates were miscalibrated or whatever. It's not just that scientists are closed-minded, although they can be. It's that the convergence of evidence isn't strong enough to overturn the mainstream theory. So, but it does happen. Maybe there are multiple migrations into North America and we just don't have all the sites. But when somebody comes up with a site like that's tens of thousands of years earlier than all the others that are accepted here, and it's over here, where are all the sites in between? It's like the gap, the 5,000-year gap with the Egyptian complex. Where are the sites? If it's true, they didn't fly there. So how'd they get there? Well, and there must be a trail, somewhere that we could find, unless they came by boat, and then that's evidence is gone.
Or unless you're dealing with 24,000 years ago, and there's not much evidence to find.
Maybe.
But if they came by boat, then that clearly implies they had navigational skills. They had the ability to build boats and find their way across the ocean.
Big
well,
ocean too.
You can do the coast. That's not quite as, you don't need a big ocean going.
But you don't need an ocean going. But
I mean, this is one
also
hypothesis that that's proposed, is that they came across by boat, just following the shore.
The same area as the Bering Strait.
Yeah, you're just 100 feet offshore. You go in and
most likely both, right? And one of the issues, of course, was the short-faced bear was so formidable, according to Dan Flores, that it would have been a huge impediment for people crossing on foot anyway. And the short-faced bear went extinct right around the time we see more evidence of human beings entering in. But why did it go extinct? That's the big question.
Well, you have to add that to the list of predators that there would have been no reason for humans to have been hunting.
Yeah, well, that's an enormous animal.
So there's sort of two factors that go on here. There's positive evidence in favor of a hypothesis, then there's negative evidence against the mainstream hypothesis. And you really need both. So it's not enough to just say, I don't accept the evidence for here. Okay, that's fine. Scientists do that all the time.
What evidence? Well, let's speak in specifics, because you keep doing this. You keep saying, well, they find things, and it turns out, no, that's not true. And then you're essentially like proving your point of being a skeptic without having any real cases.
Well,
you just keep saying this.
All of the cases.
But no, you're not saying. You can't say all the cases. If you don't want to cite anything specifically, don't keep bringing up things that are refuted, because you don't have anything that you're pointing to. So you're just muddying the water.
Okay,
you're essentially pissing in the pool.
No, the Clovis thing, for example. Göbekli Tepe, the pyramids. All of these.
What's been disproved?
No, okay, I'm making a slightly different point.
That's the problem. Is that you're not addressing the actual issues we're talking about. You muddy the water by saying things have been tossed out the window, so we have to be careful here and toss these things out the window as well.
Not toss out, just contemplate them, published in Nature, for example. So let's watch what happens to the 130,000-year-old hypothesis. If it holds up, and there's other sites that are dated that way, and so on and so forth, and that will be truly revolutionary, and scientists would accept it. They would.
You see, the problem is that when you have a very strong paradigm like Clovis first, which really dominates American archaeology, prehistoric archaeology, for a very long period, it's difficult from a career point of view for archaeologists to come up and propose alternative sites. Those who did, like Tom Dillahay, like Jacques Cinq-Mars, paid a very heavy price for so doing. So the incentive to go looking for older stuff than Clovis is extremely low in the archaeological community as a result of this ferocious reaction that went on for 30 or 40 or even 50 years. You know, I mean, also consider the Valsequillo excavations in Mexico, where there was suggestion of some sort of human presence 230,000 years ago. I mean, that good archaeology, but it was utterly dismissed, and the archaeologists involved were ruined for getting involved in that. It's hard to see how that's a profession that encourages people to think outside the box. When careers get ruined and research funding gets withdrawn for an idea that doesn't fit the current mainstream hypothesis.
Certainly we don't like to think that scientists do that. They do that. Are you familiar with Michael Cramo's book, Forbidden Archaeology?
I know Michael.
Okay. So now, and he makes, in my mind, as compelling a case as you do. And for his humans were here tens of millions of years ago. And his book is 900 pages long.
Tens of millions?
Yeah, tens of millions. Okay, and he's a Hindu, so his idea is this sort of long recycling and
but what evidence is it based on for tens of millions of years?
I'm not here to defend Michael Cremo or to have a discussion about Michael Cremo. That's not why I'm sitting at this table.
I understand, but my point is that
Michael Cremo is not me.
That's right. So, but there's lots of alternative archaeology. This is where I began. There's lots of alternative archaeology books and
right. But what evidence is there that supports that?
None.
So why are you bringing up that when there's evidence that he's bringing up?
No, Cramo's evidence is similar to his. It's mostly negative evidence that I don't accept the date of this. There is this peculiar sort of footprint-looking thing in the mud.
Cremo refers specifically to the knowledge filter. The most useful thing about that book is the publication of reports, archaeological reports, which are no longer available to the public, which do suggest an alternative point of view. I would say it's a very useful book to read. Beyond that, I have nothing to say.
Right. So
yeah, but that's not necessarily true. You're saying his only evidence. I mean, he's pointing to like some pretty significant evidence. Like the Sphinx thing is a geologist from Boston University proposed this because of water erosion. Because of water erosion that could have only been done by thousands of years of rainfall, in his opinion, as a qualified geologist.
Right.
Like that's not a lack of evidence.
I understand, but why do no other geologists or archaeologists?
There are other. No, that's not true.
Actually, they do, and I've had multiple conversations with Robert where he has cited the fact that he has gotten a considerable body of support from other geologists, not from Egyptologists, but from geologists who do recognize the effects of severe water erosion on limestone, carbonate rocks, and that's what we have there. We have a severe water erosion that appears and is preserved on the quarry walls around the Sphinx. The Sphinx itself, as Graham said, is difficult to ascertain because of all of the reconstruction that has gone on. But the quarry walls, which would have once had the very distinct stepped profile of a typical quarry, no longer have that. I mean, they have a textbook profile, parabolic profile that would be consistent with sheet flooding, which would be both dissolution, because carbonate rocks dissolve in acidic waters, and what's called corrosion, which would be the effects of water loaded with sand sediment, which would make it very rough. So if you've got the sand sediment flowing over the edge of what would have been a quarry wall, what you're going to end up with is a smoothing off of the rough corners, and the final result would be a very rounded profile like you see there. And you would also see where the fissures in the rock would be selectively widened and opened by the water penetrating those fissures. I mean, it has all of the earmarks of a very textbook case of water erosion.
Don't you think it's very disingenuous comparing that to someone who thinks that human beings have been here for tens of millions of years with no evidence to support it whatsoever?
Well, he doesn't say of course, he doesn't say he has no evidence. He has a 900-page book full of evidence. It's the quality of the evidence.
What about the quality of that evidence?
It's okay. If it was that good, we're not geologists sitting here. If it was that good, why don't geologists look at it and go, he's right?
But they
well,
do.
They do. That's
You're
the
not
point.
listening.
They do. They all do.
No,
Some
they don't all do.
Okay,
Some
why?
geologists who work with Egyptologists say that shock is wrong.
Okay, we have a geologist on the line. Why don't we ask him? Mark.
Well, we can have one guy's opinion. We could also have other guys' opinions that we can get from
I mean,
other
this matter
sources.
has been in the
What does that
public
have to do?
domain since 1992. It hasn't gone away.
Yeah.
Shock's argument that we are looking at precipitation-induced weathering on the Sphinx has not been debunked. It has been opposed. It has been disagreed with. But that is different from saying it's debunked, and Shock stays solid and strong on that issue. He is a credentialed geologist. He is a professor of geology at the University of Boston. He has a right to speak out about this, and he's stated his view. I happen to find his view very interesting, especially since it correlates with what I regard as the interesting astronomy of the site. I think that site has origins that do go back into the Younger Dryas. That's my opinion. I've stated it many times, and I've presented the evidence that I think underwrites that opinion. You and your colleagues are absolutely at liberty to disagree, and you do.
You don't think it's disingenuous to compare that to someone who says something that defies our current understanding of human beings and the actual evolution of humans?
Okay.
Like, you're talking about someone who's saying that human beings, how many millions of years old?
Tens of millions.
Tens of millions. Well, we know for a fact, right? As far if you pay attention to evolution, right? But we weren't even humans
Joe,
a million years ago, correct?
I mean, there are creationists who think.
Okay, but we're not talking about them. We're talking about Graham Hancock.
I know. But my point was that, so here you have the mainstream scientists, and so it's like there's Graham. He seems so reasonable, but there's 50 like him, and each of them thinks that they're right. They're not.
There's your language. He seems so reasonable.
Right.
So you're right there. You're accusing me of dissimulation.
And you're
I
saying
seem
there's
reasonable,
50
but
like him.
the subtext is that I'm not, and then there's 50 like me.
This is more
What a patronizing, arrogant,
No, I don't mean
deeply unpleasant and personal approach.
Graham, I'm sorry. I didn't mean it to sound like that. I really don't.
Okay.
Okay, I have a larger point. That,
Apology accepted.
that when you're faced with a bunch of different alternative theories that are coming in, and it's not, take physics. I mean, every physicist, like you just had Lawrence Krauss, he gets these letters daily of people saying, I think I figured out why Einstein was wrong. And he can't address them all. And they're smart people, they're thoughtful people, they really believe it. What do you do with that? That's my point.
I feel that's not my problem. And if there are other alternative theories, that's not my problem either. It's the problem for the mainstream to sort it out and figure which to pay attention to and which not.
All right.
Well, I'm suspicious of the whole idea of the mainstream, because even looking in the mainstream, you find so many divergent points of view that I think that's basically a fiction, that there is this mainstream that has arrived at this consensus and that there are no ulterior motives there, and that there are no dogmas that are being perpetuated there. I mean, I look at a lot of the geological stuff and realize that there are many different points of view. When we get to talk about these floods at the end of the last ice age, there are many divergent points of view. There is what could be considered the mainstream, yet even that has multiple interpretations. And the same with the comet idea. You know, I mean, I don't know what constitutes the mainstream there, because there have been a group that has opposed it at every turn, but at the same time, the group that accepts the comet hypothesis has continued to grow. In fact, there's even a number of individuals involved that set out specifically to disprove it or discredit it, who are now basically on board. And it has grown from being a small handful of scientists to there are now 63 scientists from 55 different institutions that are on board with the idea that something remarkable happened at the end of the last ice age. It was probably exogenic, meaning something from outside, something from space. There's no consensus as to exactly what that was, which would be normal because these discoveries are in their infancy at this point. But there's been an attempt to discredit the idea simply because that as the evidence has come in over the last decade, it has evolved, and new mysteries have been opened up as the evidence comes in, and the claim is being made, well, there's no consistent interpretation of this evidence, and therefore we've debunked it.
I mean, an example is Pinter's Requiem, Pinter and Dalton Requiem for the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. I mean, they published a paper in PNAS saying Requiem, suggesting that the impact hypothesis is already dead. That was in 2011. Every single one of Pinter's points have been responded to. Those who are critical of the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis rarely cite the fact that the so-called refutations have themselves been refuted, that new information is constantly coming in. I see a very one-sided game being played here with a group of academics who are determined to demonstrate that there could have been no possibility of anything like a comet impact 12,800 years ago, and that these 63 or 65 scientists who are proposing that are just completely wrong. And when they refute the refutations, I very rarely see that referred to or commented upon at all. Again, your colleague Defant has dismissed the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis without actually going in detail into the debate that's gone on.
He has this graph in his paper showing all these different dates for these different...
That's from one of the critical papers. You know, there's another side to this argument. So he needs to be listening to what the other side would say. Well, that's the point where maybe we should have Marc Defant come on, and maybe we should have Markham Lecomte come on as well, because Markham Lecomte is actually one of those 63 Younger Dryas impact scientists.
Well, explain to people that are just listening to this, what is this graph that you're showing?
Well, this is the carbon-14 date ranges from samples taken from the Younger Dryas boundary. So this is the boundary here, and the point of this is that there's not a single consistent series of dates that would consistently show. Yet, absolutely for sure, at every site it comes in right there, is that they bounce around a lot here. So now maybe Mark, this is his area, he could come on and Skype here.
They bounce around, and what's the point of this for the lay person who's listening to this?
Well, so if you take the ones that are above the gray line, then those are showing that something like an impact happened much earlier or much later, and the ones below it are that it's much earlier. So where's the consistency of a single impact consistent across that middle of that gray
I don't think there's any argument there was a single impact. In fact, there's arguments that there's more than one date. We're talking about a stretch of thousands of years. And
What?
The Younger Dryas runs 1,200 years.
Randall, please give me your because you're the expert of this.
Well, these are dates for the Younger Dryas. There's a big spread, obviously, but there's also a lot of possibilities for introducing inaccuracies into the dating. What's called the old wood effect can sometimes make it appear to be older than it is by a millennium or 2 millennium. But what we certainly do see here is a clustering right around 13,000 years ago. That looks pretty evident to me. And everybody knows who does radiocarbon dating that the dating might have errors and inconsistencies in it. The one article I think that came out last year by James Kennett and 25 others was the Bayesian chronological analysis consistent with synchronous age of 12,835 to 12,735 calibrated years before present for Younger Dryas boundary on 4 continents.
That's a refutation of precisely what you're publishing.
It is. It's a refutation of this.
But Marc Defant does not refer to that refutation.
Jamie, could you pull up the age of Leo? I think I gave that to you. And go to slide number 167. Wow. 167. And that refers to Go to slide 167.
Jesus, you're not fucking around. 167 slides.
There we go. There we go. A cosmic impact event at 12,800 calibrated years before present formed the Younger Dryas boundary layer containing peak abundances in multiple high-temperature impact-related proxies, including spherules, milk glass, and nanodiamonds. Bayesian statistical analysis of 354 dates from 23 sedimentary sequences over 4 continents established a model Younger Dryas boundary age of 12,835 calibrated years before present, supporting a synchronicity of the Younger Dryas boundary layer at high probability, 95%. This range overlaps that of a platinum peak recorded in the Greenland ice sheet and of the onset of the Younger Dryas climate episode in 6 key records, suggesting a causal connection between the impact event and the Younger Dryas. Due to its rarity and distinctive characteristics, the Younger Dryas boundary layer is proposed as a widespread correlation datum.
And Randall, if I can remember what you said correctly, you believe that there was probably more than one significant impact over a period of several thousand years.
Well, let me pop in on that very, very quickly. I don't mean to cut you off.
Go ahead,
but let's be clear. The suggestion is that 12,800 years ago, there was comets break up into multiple parts. I mean, anybody who saw the Shoemaker-Levy 9 NASA films back in 1994 is aware that that comet broke up into more than 20 fragments, all of which hit Jupiter, sometimes creating explosions larger than the Earth itself. All right, so I don't think it's controversial that comets break up into fragments. And this is the suggestion of the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, that we're dealing with a giant comet that broke up into multiple fragments, that orbits in the Taurid meteor stream, and that 4 of those fragments, that's the suggestion, 4 largest fragments, fell out of the Taurid meteor stream, coming in on a trajectory roughly northwest to southeast, crossing the North American ice cap, and there are up to 4 impacts on the North American ice cap. The impactors then continue across the Atlantic Ocean. There's a suggestion of impacts in Belgium, and indeed as far east as Abu Huraira in Syria. It's a global event. 50 million square kilometers of the Earth's surface is within the Younger Dryas boundary field. It's a really huge thing. So the suggestion is that there were multiple impacts at the beginning. Now, the next question is what happened 11,600 years ago when the Younger Dryas ends, and global temperatures shoot up incredibly rapidly. And the science on that is much less advanced than the science on the beginning of the Younger Dryas. Fred Hoyle, back in the 1980s, was puzzled by the sudden temperature increase at the end of the Younger Dryas. And he suggested, presciently I would say, that this may have been caused by a comet impact in an ocean. So maybe other bits of the Taurid meteor stream impacted the Earth, other filaments within the stream impacted the Earth 11,600 years ago, or maybe something else caused it. I mean, Robert Schoch is in favor of extraordinary solar activity being responsible for that warming. We don't absolutely know, but that's broadly the suggestion. We have the beginning and the end. It certainly impacts at the beginning, possibly impacts or other things at the end.
Well, Klube and Napier and others, Duncan Steele and other astronomers, have speculated that there could be impact eras, epochs, in which there's an enhanced possibility of the Earth being impacted, particularly if you have a large comet that enters into the solar system, begins to undergo a hierarchy of disintegrations, and basically litters the inner solar system with material. And we do know that the Earth crosses the Taurid meteor stream twice each year, once in late June and once in late October, early November. And we know that the Tunguska event of 1908, which is not speculative, I mean, that happened. It occurred on June 30th, which would have been the peak of the Taurid meteor shower. It also came from the direction of the sun. Its position in space, where it emanated, its radiant point in space from which it emanated at that time, was totally consistent with the Taurid meteor stream radiant. So it's very possible that the Tunguska event of 1908 was a member of that family of meteorites. And so, you know, that would be, again, there's nothing definitive there, but it would be a prime candidate for investigation that perhaps, and again, I mentioned earlier, this goes back to the work of Fred Whipple way back in the 1940s, who began to research the Taurid meteor stream and came to believe that it was much, much more active in the past than it is now, that it's an old diffuse meteor stream that at one time, and like Graham said, you know, it has multiple objects still within it.
Comet Enki is the best known.
Comet
We're saying
Enki is
that's
the
a
best known.
fragment. That's a fragment of the original giant
Of the
comet.
original giant comet that they estimate might have been based upon the amount of material still remnant in the zodiacal light cloud, that perhaps it was somewhere around 60 miles or 100 kilometers in diameter.
And another thing that I'm taken to task for is that I report the work of Kloob and Napier and their suggestion that the Taurid meteor stream is actually fucking dangerous and that we should be paying attention to it, that it has been a hidden hand in human history in the past and that it can cause us trouble in the future. Now, this is not gloom and doom. We have the technology to deal with the large objects in the Taurid meteor stream if any filaments are on an Earth, an orbit that will result in impacts on the Earth. At the very least, it's extremely unwise of us not to pay attention. I'm accused of being sort of a doom monger and constantly predicting the end of the world and this and that, but actually I'm simply reporting astronomers who are very concerned about the Taurid meteor stream and the possibility that we may face further impacts from it in the future. That's not woo-woo. That is science, you know.
Absolutely, and I would agree with that. And that is a form of catastrophism that scientists accept as very real. And
Some do.
Well, lots. I mean, there's, you know.
What, if anything, do you oppose about what they've just said? Nothing about the Younger Dryas period.
Well, so just a technical question. You had your slide was 12,800 on there, and so Göbekli Tepe, the oldest C14 dates are what, 90, so 11,000. All right, so that's a 1,200 year gap.
Göbekli
that's a kind of a slow catastrophe.
Well, no. Göbekli Tepe, to be very clear about the Younger Dryas, one of the puzzling things about it is that you have cataclysm at the beginning, and this global temperature slump is surely cataclysmic by any standards, and you have cataclysm at the end. You have a massive spike, a huge increase in global temperatures, and you have meltwater pulse 1b. You have a lot of water going into the ocean at that time. So both ends of the Younger Dryas are cataclysmic, and it's at the recent end of the Younger Dryas, 11,600 years ago, that we see Göbekli Tepe mysteriously popping up. And I know that you're a staunch opponent of Atlantis and that you believe Plato made Atlantis up in order to make a political point, and you may be right, but the date that Plato puts on the submergence of Atlantis is 11,600 years ago, 9,000 years before the time of Solon, which happens to coincide with meltwater pulse 1b and the end of the Younger Dryas, which I would have thought would cause you to rethink your position on Plato just a little.
Well, it's interesting. I'm open to the idea. I tend to read myths in the same way your guest Jordan Peterson does. That, you know, it's a story to deliver some sort of moral homily to us. It's a commentary on our own culture or society. It's a literary way of delivering a message to people. That's how I tend to read. Instead of reading them like, let's see if we can figure out what happened historically.
But there's hard data in Plato's whatever you think it is, and that hard data is that the submergence of Atlantis happened 9,000 years before the time of Solon. That is a date. That is 9,600 BC. That is 11,600 years ago. This, to me, is a strong reason why we shouldn't just completely dismiss Plato's notion of a lost civilization of the Ice Age.
I'm not against that idea. I mean, the idea that, say, the parting of the Red Sea happened because of some impact.
I'm not proposing that. Please don't go there.
I'm not.
Waste of time.
Okay, but there are people that think that.
I don't.
Okay, or that the plagues of the Bible can be explained.
I don't go there.
By
Waste of time.
But,
deal with Plato.
All right. So, but my point is that some of them may have historical origins. Some of them may be completely made up as mythic stories for some other reason. You have to take them one at a time. In my opinion, the Plato one is a commentary on his own culture of Athens and being too bellicose, being too warlike, and this is not good for where we're going. That's my opinion.
And the fact that he picks a date that coincides with the geologically significant date of flooding is not really going to change your opinion.
I think, again, that's
a pretty amazing coincidence.
Is it? I mean, we're finding a connection, not Plato. I mean,
well, Plato said there was an advanced civilization
with
with advanced agriculture, advanced architecture, advanced navigational abilities, which was submerged by the sea, swept from the face of the earth, so that mankind had to begin again like children with no memory of what went before. And lo and behold, he puts a geologically significant date on that, a date that we ourselves have only known is significant in the last 20 or 30 years.
So, where is this place, this Atlantis? I mean, so as you know, there's there's a long history of people speculating. If we found a site, that would be a big plus.
Go
for
do
that
more marine
position.
archaeology.
Well, if we take it literally, obviously then it's below the ocean. But I don't necessarily take Plato's account literally, but I do say, well, it's rather coincidental that his dating falls exactly on meltwater pulse 1b, when we know there was huge influx of water into the ocean. And also, if we look at his geography, it's interesting because he cites, basically a landmass west of the Pillars of Heracles, which is Pillars of Hercules, the Straits of Gibraltar. And he places this essentially in the mid-Atlantic. I think it was Crantor, one of the commentators on him, that said it was something like 3 or 4 days sail west. But if you look there is a sunken landmass that sank at the end of the last ice age because of the rapidly rising sea level. And this has been well established by marine geology, looking at evidence that the Azores Plateau underwent an isostatic subsidence, which would have been resulting from the rapidly rising sea level. We know there's no doubt that the North American continent has rebounded isostatically after the removal of this tremendous mass of ice that mantled North America up to anywhere from 1,000 to possibly 1,500 feet. Well, if you do a comparable isostatic adjustment of the mid-Atlantic ridge, you'll find that the Azores island complex are much, much larger. And it turns out that might actually be a nice place to develop at least a maritime culture, something along the lines of the Phoenicians or the Minoans during the period of the Ice Age, because during the period of the Ice Age, the climate of the world was so much different than now. The Great Basin area was filled with huge lakes, vegetation, forests, savanna, and grasslands. Like Graham said, with the lowered sea level, there were much larger areas of the coastline that were exposed. And that's probably where most of people would have resided during the Ice Ages, near the coastlines, because that would have been the most benevolent place. With the rising of the sea level, all of that's lost. And there's nothing really fringed about saying, well, people might have lived on islands in the mid-Atlantic, especially when we know that those islands most likely had a benevolent climate during the Ice Age. So I don't go into crystal technology and flying machines or whatever, all of this speculative stuff that has accreted to it. But if we just keep it simple and say, well, is it possible that a culture along the lines of the Minoans or the Phoenicians could have existed? Could they have existed on an island culture in the mid-Atlantic? And there's nothing really, extreme about that idea, in my mind.
Even the idea that a more advanced, sophisticated quasi-technological culture coexisted with hunter-gatherers isn't too strange. I mean,
we've seen that in the 20th century.
We do so today. We coexist with hunter-gatherers in the Amazon jungle who don't even know we exist. I mean, so I don't see why a priori that's just an impossible idea to look at.
Am I misremembering that you, in your book, you mentioned Indonesia as a site for Atlantis?
I mentioned Gunung Padang not as a site for Atlantis. That's Danny Hillman Natuwajaja, who is a geologist. He's Indonesia's leading expert in megathrust earthquakes, as a matter of fact. He has written a book proposing that Indonesia was Atlantis and that Gunung Padang, which he's been involved in investigating, is a site from Atlantean times. Danny has proposed that. Now, what's interesting about Indonesia is that Indonesia sits upon the Sunda Shelf. And the Sunda Shelf was one of the parts of the world that was most massively flooded at the end of the Ice Age. I mean, if you go back to the end of the Ice Age, you're not looking at the Malaysian peninsula. You're not looking at the Indonesian islands going out towards the Philippines. You're looking at a giant continent-sized landmass, all of which went underwater at the end of the last Ice Age, really rather rapidly. So I think he has a point. I think it's an interesting, it's one of those areas in the world where there was very large-scale flooding. Huge amounts of land were swallowed up. Also, Sahel, the connection of Australia to New Guinea during the Ice Age was also washed away. There's a whole range of issues regarding sea level rise in that very area, which anybody with an interest in these subjects should be paying attention to.
So it's quite possible that, like today, many of the advanced civilizations of today are on the water, whether it's New York or Los Angeles, and that was probably the case back then. And so the idea of Atlantis might not have been about one particular area, but many advanced areas that were wiped out along with their knowledge.
This is the thesis of that book I mentioned, Noah's Flood, that the two geologists with the Black Sea theory that there were, it was rimmed with small villages, and the massive flooding almost instantly wiped out, and then that gets passed down as the oral tradition is these myths. To me, that seems totally reasonable.
Totally reasonable.
Yeah.
Well, why don't we get into more discussion about the actual impact hypothesis and the mega flooding, so that we can get our our guys on standby, get them involved.
What is your geologist, since you're by yourself and there's two of them, what is, it's only fair, right? What is your geologist opposed to what Randall and Graham are proposing?
I think it's the, on the impact hypothesis versus the multiple glacial dams that burst over periods of time, like that, I have that slide.
Okay, well, let's call him up and get him on Skype. And we've never done this before, so this might suck. Well, hopefully it'll work.
See, this slide here, he is showing these are each independent carbon-14 dates of these different instant floods in North America.
Right.
From in each individual ice dam.
And what separates these dates? Well, they're separated by...
Well, looks like from 20,000 to 12,000, so all before the impact.
Well, 12,800, wasn't that one?
Oh, yes.
Mark's on the line.
Right,
So
right,
it's
right.
Mark's on the line. What is this? Mark, Mark, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Mark Defend.
Mark Defend, thank you very much for doing this. We really appreciate you coming on here.
It's my pleasure.
So you've had a chance to listen to these guys talk. What is your thoughts just stepping into this cold?
Well, first of all, I did not mean to upset Mr. Hancock. He seemed to be quite disturbed, and I want to apologize if I've disturbed him.
No, you haven't disturbed me, and I'm not upset. It's just simply that you're extremely selective in what you present in your draft, admittedly draft article that you've chosen to put online. You don't represent me accurately.
Let me go ahead and answer his question, because I know we're getting short on time.
No,
here.
we have plenty of time. We have plenty of time.
Okay. Well, first of all, would you allow me just to address Göbekli Tepe for a minute?
Sure. Would you like to address the article first? I think that probably would be the most fair, since we just brought that up.
Okay. I'm sorry. What was the question then?
Graham?
Well, I read out on air various passages in your article where you misrepresent me.
No, I didn't.
Sorry?
No, I didn't misrepresent you.
You didn't misrepresent me.
No.
Okay, so
in fact, you said that I said that I was actually talking about someone in Indonesia when I said you didn't understand Newton's physics.
No, I didn't say. I'm sorry, I didn't say you were talking about someone in Indonesia. I said you were talking about Jesus Gamara in Peru is who I was talking about. And Jesus Gamara does have very exotic views on gravitation, which I state seriously are not my interest. I do say he may be right, but I don't say he's right. I say this is not my interest, and I go on to say what my interest in is his work. You pick
Excuse
on
me,
that.
You're drowning me out here. I was asked to explain whether or not I thought I was misleading. And I don't think I was misleading. You clearly state in there that maybe gravity was due to the way we've changed orbits around the sun. Gravity is not due to that. It's due to
no, I don't state that.
Mass and the inverse of what do you mean?
I don't state that. Jesus Gamara
Yes,
states
do.
that, and I say I disagree with it.
Come on.
I say
Well,
I disagree with it.
I want to be respectful. I can't really hear you when I'm talking. I apologize, but I feel like you are selectively changing the meaning of what I'm saying.
Well,
Okay,
why don't you quote me as these words from my text? When you say that I buy the gravity thing of Jesus Gamara, why don't you quote me when I say
hold on. I said just the opposite of that.
What I go on to say, not quoted in the attack, is the following quote. However, this isn't the part of his theory I'm interested in. Where I feel he is solidly persuasive is in his observations of the anomalous character of the monuments of the Andes. I am not pinning anything on Jesus Gamara's gravitational ideas. I am saying very clearly what it is in his approach that I am interested in. I'm not going to dismiss all of his approach because he has an approach on gravity that you don't like. That's not even of interest to me, and I say so in the book. You don't report that, therefore I suggest you misrepresent me.
No, Mr. Hancock, what I brought up him for was simply to state that you didn't understand, and I say it right there, that you don't understand Newton's physics.
But I'm not even talking about Newton's. I'm not talking
as a
about
scientist if you don't understand Newton's simple physics.
I am not
the
talking.
Laws of Newton.
If I wished to make an argument about gravity, I wouldn't go saying that that isn't the part of Jesus Gamarra's theory that I'm interested in. I'm interested in the other aspect of his work, his observations through years of field work.
My point was simply to point out that you didn't understand Newton mechanics.
But
We're
I
not
don't
talking about this guy.
Stop,
You're
everybody,
completely wasting time here.
Okay, Graham, the way the article
Michael,
is...
hold on a second. Hold on. Let these guys talk it out.
We did misrepresent him. We did.
Yeah.
The way the sentence is structured, it's clearly out of context. We're going to change that.
Yeah, I was taken out of context, and that's what I'm objecting
Mark,
to.
I'm not sure why he included it in the book in the first place, but he's not arguing about the gravity at all. So we will fix that. Maybe we could get straight to the flooding thing that
as long
Randall
as
was talking about.
Graham is fine with that. I mean, Graham, I know there was something else.
Well, yeah,
that you
the
to.
other thing that I find to be misrepresenting is that the statement, yet Hancock makes the following stunning claim, quote, "Our ancestors are being initiated into the secrets of metals and how to make swords and knives." What Mark Defant does not tell his readers is that I make that claim. I don't make that claim. I am actually reporting what is said in the Book of Enoch. That's not me who's saying that. That's the Book of Enoch.
Graham, we'll fix that.
Okay. Otherwise, let's get back to the main meat of this, for God's sake.
Okay.
Just give me the list of things that, and I'll fix it.
I will.
We'll fix it. Because that's not the point of it.
Well, Mark, you're obviously very critical of Graham's work, and maybe erroneously so. But let's get to what you think about what you've heard so far.
All right, Mr. Rogan. I don't want to come across as a pompous scientist. What I want to do is I want to protect people from these grandiose assumptions. Graham in his first, Mr. Hancock in his first book.
Please call me Graham.
Fingerprints.
Please call me Graham.
Okay, Graham in his first book, in Fingerprints, suggested that there was a continent where this civilization lived, and through some machinations, this continent went south and ended up destroying that civilization. Well, as a geologist, that's just nonsense.
Mm-hmm.
And now he comes back and he wants us to believe that he was all wrong. And then all of a sudden, it's okay now to believe in comet strikes to kill this famous civilization that's supposed to exist.
So, Mark,
this is duping people. I don't know if he means to do it, but he certainly seems to be duping people.
Mark, all my work is in print and online. I mean, I gather that you see your role as a protector for the public. Obviously, you feel that the public are not intelligent enough to make discerning decisions of their own in this respect.
No,
however, to address...
I'm saying that the public doesn't understand the science to the degree that you're misrepresenting.
So they need the superior knowledge of Mark Defant in order to understand it. Well, fine.
I think they need the knowledge of science.
Okay, well, that's
not
okay.
the knowledge that I have.
Let me come to your point, which is you're saying that I proposed one mechanism for cataclysm in Fingerprints of the Gods, and that I'm proposing another mechanism for cataclysm today. What I proposed in Fingerprints of the Gods was that there had been a gigantic cataclysm in the ballpark of 12,500 years ago. I looked at a number of possibilities, of which the most striking to me at the time was Earth crust displacement. And Earth crust displacement is reported, it's the work of Charles Hapgood, not my work, but I do report it in Fingerprints of the Gods as an excellent theory which explains the information. Since I wrote Fingerprints of the Gods, I've learned a lot. And I wouldn't want to defend that theory strongly today. I don't know if you have bought the latest edition of my book, the paperback edition of Magicians of the Gods, but it contains a chapter saying whatever happened to Earth crust displacement. I address the change of view in this, and I think I have a right to change my view, and I think it's healthy that, I mean, why would I stick permanently to a view that I hold in 1995 if new evidence persuades me that it's wrong? I'm sure that's a good thing, not a bad thing, and fundamental proposition is we had a massive global cataclysm in the ballpark of 12,500 years ago. So naturally, it's of great interest to me when a large group of scientists, more than 60 of them, over a period of more than 10 years now, present evidence of a massive comet impact event 12,800 years ago, exactly
Graham,
in the window I proposed.
Slippery. You are implying that there are a lot of people out there that believe in this. There are some people that believe in it, I agree, but for the most part, I think taking an honest view, the comet hypothesis has gotten debunked.
Well, that's complete rubbish, Mark. That's complete rubbish.
I would also point out that in fingerprints, you had people believing that the end of the world was coming in 2012. Now, how am I supposed to take you seriously when you say things like that and then change your mind? We could all be dead by now if we believed you.
I have absolutely changed my mind on the Mayan calendar. I regard the Mayan calendar as an interesting technological artifact with a better estimate of the length of the solar year than the estimate that we have with today. The Mayan calendar is based primarily on the position of the sun amongst the constellations at the winter solstice. And we are in an 80-year window when the sun sits astride the dark rift of the Milky Way between the constellations of Sagittarius and Scorpio on the winter solstice. That window is 80 years wide, so the story of the Mayan calendar, by the way, isn't actually quite over yet. But
I'm not. Means?
Yes, I know exactly what precession means.
Okay, well, all of this stuff that you claim is on a precession. A precession is the Earth spinning like a top.
Don't teach grandma to suck eggs.
It has nothing to do with running through comet clouds, and yet you're saying that somehow we're on some sort of cycle where the comets are going to come back and strike the Earth right now, sometime during the next 40 years. That's what you said in Magicians.
No, that's what Victor Klube and Bill Napier and Emilio Spedicato say.
Don't blame this
I'm a reporter.
You're the one that said it in your book. You just got all over Mr. Michael Shermer for saying the same things about other people. I want to know what you think.
But Mark,
you tell me what you think.
I am a reporter, and I make it very clear.
You can't cop out on it.
I'm not copping out. Let me finish.
You're talking about science.
Mark, we can't talk over each other like this.
I am a reporter, and it is my job to report the work of other people, and I report the work of Victor Klube, Bill Napier, and Emilio Spedicato, all of whom draw attention to the Taurid meteor stream and who regard it as the greatest collision hazard facing the Earth at this time, and who specifically indicate that we may run into a filament of the Taurid meteor stream in the next 30 years that is going to be very bad for our civilization.
And it has nothing to do with precession.
When did I say it had anything to do with precession?
You have a whole section on precession in Magicians of the Comet.
Indeed, as a clock, as a timer, as a way of going back through the ages, but I'm not saying precession is causing this encounter with the Taurid meteor stream, and go find the paragraph where I say that.
No. What you're saying is that we're on a cycle, that 12,000 years ago, this civilization was destroyed, and now you're saying, that civilization was so smart that they knew we were going to go through another shower and we're all doomed in the next 40 years.
Yeah.
Well, you didn't say doomed in Magicians like you did in Fingerprints, but we must conclude that that's your opinion, because I don't know anybody else that you referenced on that issue.
Well,
but precession has nothing to do with that, and it's not even on that cycle. It has a cycle of about 21,000 years.
25
so your cycles are even off on precession.
25,920 years, actually,
that is not
for precession. 1 degree every 72 years, give or take a small margin. That is the precession. You're really teaching grandma to suck eggs here.
So anyway, I guess this has just been going on all day. You can't criticize Michael for bringing up other people that are saying strange things and comparing it to you and say, oh no, you can't say that because it's not about me. It's not true. You're doing the same thing. You're reporting about other people and saying nonsense.
Yeah, I'm reporting the work of Victor Klube, Bill Napier, and Emilio Spedicato.
And
I also indicate that I strongly support that work. That's as far as I go.
Mark, if I could stop you here, so you think that this comet wiping out all the Ice Age megafauna theory has been debunked? Is that what you're saying?
No, sir, I have not saying that, but I think that if you read the literature carefully, the majority of scientists right now, and I know that this is still going, you know what I like about the comet people is that they're doing it in the scientifically right way. They're getting people to review the material. They're getting people to go through that gauntlet to where they get criticized. They make sure that they do things right, and they get it out there. Firestone did this in 2007. He was crucified. He's come back. His group has come back with a lot of good stuff. So I want to wait and see this play out. I said that in my paper, that we're going to have to wait to get a conclusion here. So I'm not saying that they're wrong, but right now, if I read the literature as a scientist, I have to say that the comet guys are getting hit pretty hard.
What do you make of the latest platinum paper in Nature's Scientific Reports? The platinum anomaly across North America and its coincident in time with the Greenland ice cores and the platinum anomaly there. What do you say to that?
Well, I say that, and maybe we can bring him on. The problem with that is that what does platinum have to do with the comet? You know, platinums are high in asteroids, but they're not high in comets. Comets are icy bodies. I saw the paper. I read it. I think it's interesting, but I can't for the life of me figure out how he's correlating it. He has, in the different areas of the Clovis, he has platinum concentrations that are seemingly not matching up. They're outside the Younger Dryas. They're inside the Younger Dryas. I'd like you to show those.
Let's bring Malcolm.
It's hard to understand what he's trying to say. It doesn't refute the common hypothesis.
Let's bring Malcolm on, since he's one of the co-authors of the platinum paper.
This is going to get super complicated.
But let's try.
One caller at a time. We can only do one caller at a time, apparently.
Well, I think Malcolm, should have his voice.
Well, I don't want to criticize him if he can't be here.
That's okay.
What I'd like to do is go back and talk a little bit, if I may, about Göbekli Tepe, because I've read Schmidt. I know that Schmidt never ever found anything to suggest that there were anything in the early part of Göbekli Tepe that were not hunter-gatherers. They all were hunter-gatherers. You know, he found 20, I think, I may be wrong on this, but I think he found 22,000 stone tools there when he dug that place up.
I'm not disputing that.
He never found any domesticated animals. He never found any domesticated grain. He found tons of bones of animals. So we know that about 100 to 200 people were probably working on Göbekli Tepe at one time, and they were fed by wild animals and grain. So there's no reason to go out on a limb here and say that some magical civilization came in. And by the way, that's another thing that drives me crazy. You're saying that these guys were magicians. You're saying that they had secret knowledge. What possible secret knowledge did they give to the people at Göbekli Tepe? How can you possibly say things like that?
I'm not saying that. The word magicians of the gods comes from the Apkallu in ancient Sumer. And they were considered to have superior powers, and they were considered to be magicians of a sort. Should I not report that because it's there in the Sumerian text?
No, I think you should tell us what Michael's been asking all day is what were their superpowers?
I'm not saying that they had superpowers. It's the Sumerians who said that. I simply report that. You can regard that as a cop-out if you like, but I am a fucking reporter.
Why did you call your book Magicians of the Gods?
Because that's the direct implication of the Apkallu. They were the magicians of the gods.
It sounds like you're saying they had magical powers to me.
No, I'm saying that they were the magicians of the gods as they were called in an ancient culture. That's all I'm saying.
Okay, well, I just want your audience to know that Schmidt, who worked there for 20 years, didn't go there for 2 days and look around, take some notes and leave and write a book on it. He worked there for 20 years, and he found, with dates and everything, he found that there were hunter-gatherers there building those megaliths.
I don't disagree.
If you went to Easter Island and you found the Moai, and you said, oh my gosh, there must have been some secret civilization that made these Moai because stupid hunter-gatherers couldn't possibly make these. Well, we know that there were no special people on Easter Island. It had to be made by hunter-gatherers. Why would you poo-poo
Sorry, are you saying?
Have to call a superior civilization to do that?
Are you seriously saying that the inhabitants of Easter Island were hunter-gatherers?
Well, absolutely. And as a matter of fact, we can see
on that
the
little
population
island
of the Pacific Ocean.
They had no agriculture. Are you saying that?
To the Pacific Ocean until about 1,000 years ago. I mean, to Easter Island until about 1,000 years ago. What do you think they were? They certainly weren't a big civilization.
Mark, please let him respond. Go ahead.
Well, first of all, did you meet Klaus Schmidt? Do you know him personally?
Well, you know he's dead, and you know that I haven't met him.
Okay, well, I did meet him. I do know him personally. I did record my interviews with him, with his agreement, and what he states clearly. I don't disagree with you that the people around Göbekli Tepe were hunter-gatherers when Göbekli Tepe was started. What precisely intrigued Klaus Schmidt
was the possibility, his phrase not mine, that Göbekli Tepe was a center of innovation, a place where new ideas were deliberately seeded and spread out in the population. I have Klaus Schmidt on record saying that. I quote him saying that in my book. And that, to me, is a very interesting proposition because it suggests that we have a site here that is being used to mobilize a population and to transfer to them the knowledge of agriculture, which suddenly appears around Göbekli Tepe at the time that Göbekli Tepe is functioning.
What do you mean by suddenly?
Can I add to that?
What I mean by suddenly is Klaus Schmidt stated very clearly that these are the people, the very same people who made Göbekli Tepe, in Klaus Schmidt's view, are the people who, quote unquote, invented agriculture.
If you don't mind me interrupting here for a second, what about Easter Island? Was Easter Island established by hunter-gatherers or not? You were saying not?
You say it was established by hunter-gatherers. I say not. I say Easter Island was an agricultural society. What's there to hunt and gather on a tiny island? Have you been to Easter Island? I have, 6 times. And you know you can walk across it in 3 hours. What's there to hunt and gather on that?
Oh, no, you're misunderstanding my point. My point is that these are not sophisticated people.
Okay, but sorry, you said...
I agree with you on Göbekli Tepe. I think that you got Schmidt right. And in fact, it's a UNESCO site. We all recognize how important it is. But what I think Michael and I can't understand is how this ties into some magnificent civilization. There's nothing there that indicates that they were influenced by some other civilization.
Except
they started out as hunter-gatherers, and then they evolved into agricultural society, and that's what makes it a great site.
Can I answer you? You're seriously saying that there's nothing there? I mean, the largest megalithic site on Earth, 7,000 years older than Stonehenge is there. There's no background to it, no evidence of practice or trade. The megalithic site itself is the problem for me.
Okay, I honestly, we've got megaliths in quite a few sites. And by the way, you're right. There's a megalith just down the road from Göbekli Tepe, and there are probably several other. I can see them on maps.
Yeah, we need to get to the bottom of this.
We've got a wonderful amount of work to do there.
You bet.
So I think, Graham, we're in good agreement on this.
Okay, so you guys are in agreement on that.
What I want to point out is that I don't think that there's any need to call upon this great civilization that you say exists.
Well, to me, the simplest explanation is a transfer of knowledge, a transfer of technology. I've been writing about the possibility of a lost civilization for more than a quarter of a century. That's what I do. I hope that it's a useful contribution to the debate. I mean, archaeologists can choose not to listen to anything I say, to dismiss me as a complete lunatic, as they often do, to accuse me, as you do in writing, of duping the public, of conning the public, and so on and so forth.
I didn't use the word conning.
Well, you did use the word conning, actually. It's in the very last paragraph of your article, because I got it right here in front of me.
We will fix that.
You did use the word conning.
Michael, this was the first thing I wrote. I just put it up for my students.
Well, it's there. It's there.
Wait a minute. Hold on a second. Hold on a second.
I am left with... What I am left with is that Hancock... I'm going to put my reading glasses on so I can read this properly. What I am left with, this is quoting you, Mark, is that Hancock has a real knack for conning a hellacious number of people into buying his books. I mean, that's a direct ad hominem insult. It's online in your article. Do you stand by it or not?
Listen, I apologize to you for the use of that language. Is that what you want to hear? Because I do.
But I'm sorry you used it in the first place. I think you're misleading your students.
Why would you say that you're just putting that online for your students as if that's not a big deal? You're putting it on the internet. And to say that you're just putting it online for your students, and you've been proven incorrect on how many different times in this article now?
Well, about 7.
Proven incorrect? I haven't been proven incorrect.
Well, you have. You misquote me. You don't give the context.
I'm not the guy that said the world was going to end in 2012.
And even Michael has said that the skeptic article will not reflect these out of context statements that you're making here.
Right, so the core is the impact hypothesis likely to be true or not, and as an independent phenomenon, is it connected to Göbekli Tepe and the Younger Dryas? I mean, that's kind of what we're getting at. So then we can, maybe you can explain that graph that shows all the glacial dam bursts and the dating of those as thousands of years before the 12,800 year impact.
Can we put the map up first? We need to map up
you guys
first,
can get into
Michael.
what does that mean? Well,
which map is that?
Which map?
On your article.
Which map, Mark?
I'm sorry, it's the glacial map. Western Washington or Washington State and Oregon.
Okay.
Jamie will put it up.
And by the way, I should, to protect Michael here, I submitted this. Michael made immense amount of changes on that paper. I put it up because I wanted my students to see it. I had no idea that people would go online and look at that like you have.
Good Lord.
And unfortunately, you've sent tens of thousands of people probably to it by letting them know it's on here, and I'm sorry for that.
Well,
but anyway, let's go to this
why
map.
is it okay to just put that up online for your students?
Yeah, I don't get that.
Why? How come you don't have any problem with that, but you do have a problem with it as it stands being released to the general public?
Well, you know, maybe
I think I stand by everything I said, except for the personal comment at the end.
Well, we'll see
Okay,
if that
so let's take a look
survives
at
the
this
editing
map.
process.
Yeah,
Okay, let's put up this map.
let's get back to the map.
Okay, the brown areas are, now, I have to emphasize that the Scablands is very famous. People have been working on, geologists have been working on this for more than 100 years, I bet, and very intricate, detailed mapping. And we now know what areas have been flooded. That's in the brown. The green areas are the old glacial lakes. One of them you can see is the Columbia Lake, and the other one on the far right, over in Montana, that's Lake Missoula. Now, I guess my point here is that you guys want to make the flooding out here to be immense, and I think Brett's original idea was that there was just one flooding, but then Brett's came to understand after looking at the data and all of the geologic work that it wasn't just one flood, that it's many floods, and that was the point of all of those dates that I show you. That there have been at least 17 specific floods dated. There are probably as many as 40 to 50 floods out there, and they're all probably related to glacial dams breaking. Now, where in the world would you ever say that this small area relative to an entire continent, why would you say that this is evidence for a comet strike? Not even the comet guys are saying that this flooding out here is related to a comet, because there are a large number of area, a very small number of actual area that is flooded. If you take a look now at my dates, or not my dates, but the dates, do you have that, Michael? The one with
we're going to bring that up, but let's let Randall Carlson address you
Sure.
now, because he's the one that's the expert of this.
I mean, he's got a point that if you just look at, if you confine your examination to this area, but the point is you've got evidence of mega flooding all around the ice sheet margin, from the Atlantic to the Pacific. You've got the work of Kehew and Lord in the Midwestern states, South Dakota, North Dakota, eastern Montana. You've got massive spillways out there that discharged off the ice sheet. You have Glacial River Warren that was undoubtedly formed by most likely Glacial Lake Agassiz, and you've got the St. Croix River, where I took Graham a couple of years ago, that had mega floods down it. There were mega floods down the Mississippi River. There was Glacial Lake Wisconsin that discharged down the Wisconsin River, left the Wisconsin Dells. There are the Finger Lakes in New York that probably were created by massive floods emanating off of them.
No, they were scoured.
Scoured, exactly, right. They were scoured, and they were probably scoured by subglacial floods that were coming under high pressure, because you have the drumlin fields that are just to the south of them, and you've probably seen the work of John Shaw and
Yes.
Claire Beanie and Bruce Rainey and those out of Canada.
Yes, but I think Shaw's idea about drumlins is crazy.
Well, why would that be? How do you propose the drumlins then were formed?
Oh, easily. The glaciers came forward and topped the terminal moraine and spread the moraines out into drumlins.
But how? I mean, you've got features that look like they're totally fluvially produced. They look like inverted boat hulls. You look at the internal stratification. How does glaciers create internal stratification? I've looked at numerous drumlins in Canada. I've looked at drumlins in New York State. I've looked at drumlins in probably a dozen different places, and where you can see exposures, you see stratification. You don't see, if glaciers are grinding over a deformable substrate, how is it that they produce anything other than a chaotic jumble of glacial till? You can actually see layering.
Well,
I've seen it
right.
myself, and we can pull up pictures of it here in a minute, and I'd like for you to
just a
explain
minute
to
before
me.
you do that, because I'm not disagreeing with you.
Okay.
A Drummond, by definition, is made up of till. I think that we're getting kind of technical for this audience, but you know, an esker is something that's stratified, not a Drummond. So you're misidentifying them as drumlins.
No, I am not misidentifying drumlins. I know very clearly the difference between an esker and a drumlin. I've looked at many eskers. I've hiked on them. I've flown over them in airplanes.
The Finger Lakes are gouged.
They are gouged, yes. Are they gouged by glaciers, or are they also gouged by subglacial megafloods? That's the question, and that, I think that's a fair question to ask. And if we look at some of the studies, we find out that the depositional material in them is massive. It's not stratified, it's massive, as if it was dumped in there over a very short period of time.
Let me go back to the to the bigger picture.
But hold on a second. What's your point about that?
Sorry, Joe, I can't hear you.
I'm sorry. Respond to that. What he just said.
What am I responding to? Look, we're going to have to disagree. I mean, what am I supposed to argue? I don't want to get in an argument with him here. He thinks that they're done by water. I think that traditionally, the way most geologists see the Finger Lakes is they're gouged out. They're parallel to one another. If he thinks it's water, okay, what can we do? We can disagree, I guess.
Well,
let me go back up to the main glacier. The Laurentide Glacier, Wally